died twice before realizing what needed to be changed in her life. At first, the girl was not against becoming part of the Benyu family, whose son struck her to the depths of her soul. The heroine couldn't take her eyes off Geldry, but in reality, he was quite the womanizer, known in high circles. However, the parents supported their beloved son in everything because they did not believe the bad rumors about him. For the first time, the heroine felt as if she had found herself in a real fairy tale with a handsome and rich husband. Only now everything has changed, because Ebel knew very well about her sad future. That's why the lady didn't think for a second when she joyfully hit her future husband in the face with all her might. The guy clearly didn't expect such a trick from the girl with whom he had a good relationship before. His cheek instantly began to hurt as Ebel put as much force as she could into the blow. The heroine was the only one who was happy at that moment, because she wanted to be free forever. Geldry's parents were horrified by what their bride did in front of all the invited guests. None of the aristocrats were able to understand what had gone wrong, since the wedding was declared cancelled. Only Travis knew the meaning of her actions, because she managed to die both in her world and in this one. Her actions created a real sensation, because nothing like this had ever happened at a wedding before. But from that moment on, the girl did not want to get married at any cost, no matter how good her husband seemed. In her past life, the heroine was an ordinary office worker who quickly became exhausted every day. She worked even at night, since she barely had enough money for a meager living. The girl herself did not like this life, but she needed the money so much that she had no other choice. The only thing that kept the lady on her feet was her dream of a good future in which she could open her own store. It must be a candy store, which Miss has been drawn to most since childhood. For this reason, the heroine often attended pastry chef courses during her free time, wanting to learn everything. But as a result, the girl died from overwork, which she did not expect from herself. But fate did not abandon the heroine, because she was reborn in the body of a rich aristocrat named Abel Travis. She even had her own personal assistant, Belle Joyce, whose loyalty was legendary. And everything would be fine if the girl did not have to get married, as was prescribed for all aristocrats. Political marriages were a normal occurrence in this world, so no one was surprised. And soon Ebel had to go to meet her future relatives, which she did not want. But the parents insisted that their daughter finally find a good partner for marriage. Geldry Benyu charmed the heroine at first sight with his appearance and well-hung tongue. Ebel could never have imagined in her dreams that she would have such a handsome and rich husband. Therefore, she quickly came to terms with the fact that his relatives, with their character, left much to be desired. For the sake of this guy, the girl was ready to endure any bullying, just to remain loved. Therefore, she began to visit her future mother-in-law more often, although it was problematic to get to her estate. This woman had such a nasty character that her own husband barely spoke to her. But the heroine did not forget about all the rules of etiquette when she was forced to communicate with a woman. Anne Benyu always pretended to be glad to have guests, but behind her smile hid real anger and envy. And even now, Madame deftly covered herself with pillows, leaving no room for Ebel to rest. Almost immediately, the madam played a dirty trick on the girl, who already found it difficult to come to the estate. However, the woman demanded that Ebel come to them every day without rest. The lady had to smile happily at this lady so as not to spoil her relationship with her relatives, although in reality, she was horrified that such a woman gave birth to such a beautiful son. However, for the sake of the handsome Geldry, the heroine was ready to do a lot, so she decided to endure her mother-in-law's dislike. The woman was only concerned that her son would end up in good female hands after a decent marriage. But their conversation was not destined to end, because the assistant suddenly burst into the room. It so happened that the guy interrupted the ladies at the most important moment of the conversation, but they forgot about it. It turned out that the entire Travis estate, along with the people inside, had completely burned down within a few hours. At that moment, Ebel had not yet been reborn a second time, so she was not ready for such an event. The death of her parents upset her to the point of pain in her chest, even though they were not family to her. So soon, the sadness for the dead affected the entire heroine, who wanted to be happy, no matter how much Ebel strived for joy. Every time fate somehow threw something sad at her, she saw hope only in Geldry, whom she loved madly in her first reincarnation. It was to him that Travis threw herself into his arms at the moment when she was left completely without family and friends. Ebel was so hurt and lonely that she couldn't bear to look at any other aristocrat. The guy was only happy to support the girl who was soon to become his wife. He always tried to please other people, and Abel was no exception to the rule. Perhaps Geldry was simply taking advantage of the moment, but it was at that very time that he proposed to the lady. Benyu didn't want to wait any longer, because nothing better could happen in the girl's life. At that moment, the most important thing in the world for Ibel was to receive a proposal from her handsome lover. Therefore, the lady did not leave the guy's side, not caring at all that she was breaking all the rules of etiquette. Benyu himself doted on the girl, who struck him with her beauty at first sight. Ebel's happiness knew no bounds, because her dreams were coming true after a difficult past. This is how beautiful and magical their wedding was at the moment of the heroine's first rebirth. But soon enough, Ebel realized how short-lived her happiness and joy had been. After just a couple of months, a woman appeared at the Benyu estate who got on the lady's nerves. Geldry introduced her as Kelly Benyu, as this lady was his older sister who had returned from abroad. At first, Abel reacted joyfully to the appearance of her relative, trying to make friends with her. But from the very beginning, the aristocrat's gaze slid extremely unpleasantly over her brother's wife. The heroine didn't even have time to realize how Kelly completely ignored her entire greeting. At that moment, Miss had no idea that all this was only the beginning of the horror in this family. She could only silently watch the impudent aristocrat who was not paying attention to her. Even then, Ebel felt awkward, but she tried to push away all the unpleasant feelings and emotions. However, the very next day, Kelly began to behave provocatively, provoking her young relative. The elder Benyu studiously ignored Ebel, whom she did not like from the first sight. And in this situation, the heroine could do nothing, because Geldry was captivated by his beautiful sister. Besides, around her brother, Kelly quickly pretended that she was actually white and fluffy, and the boy always believed his older sister, who seemed to him to be much smarter and wiser than himself. Meanwhile, even from her close friend Pansy Grant, the lady heard how her husband communicated with others. The guy was so friendly by nature that he saw nothing wrong with his conversations with the ladies. But girls didn't really like those who easily found common ground with others, even when married. Therefore, Grant advised Ebel to run away as fast as she could from such a husband, who essentially did not love her. The problem was that the heroine had nowhere to run, because all her money had burned down, along with her family. Only the support of a close friend saved Ebel, who could not find peace from her worries. If Miss had only known that she could not be trusted even with Pansy, she would have behaved quite differently. Just yesterday they were talking sweetly to each other, and today the girl was making eyes at Geldry. But the worst thing was that the guy responded to the married aristocrat with his affectionate smile. This was the last straw for Ebel, who could no longer bear the numerous losses and betrayals. She loved both Benja and Grant, and this is how they both repaid her for this diligent love. In just a moment, the lady was in her room, which was the only place left where she could hide. The girl's head was constantly filled with the faces of those people whom she had begun to hate madly. The most offensive thing was that this list also included Pansy's close friend, who liked Geldry so much. Ebel's whole body was filled with indignation and anger, and her heart and mind demanded revenge. But fate once again decided otherwise, playing a very cruel joke on Ebel. As the lady fell down the cliff, her whole sad life flashed before her eyes. Ebel only regretted that she was never able to take revenge on the people who had so cruelly offended her during her life. The girl could not change anything else. But, as we know, her story did not end there. All because the heroine was reborn again, and this time she did not marry the unpleasant Geldry. That is why, on her wedding day, she behaved so provocatively and brazenly in front of others. Benyu had no idea that his bride could have so much strength because of hatred. The guy was completely defeated at this moment, which should have been a happy moment for him. But the heroine decided otherwise, because now only her own life was important to her. No matter how much the groom's parents clutched their hearts, the lady did not feel sorry for anyone in this hall. She left the room with a calm soul, hoping that she would never see this family again. It just turned out that Ebel had almost no money left after the fire at the estate. But even this did not make the heroine, who had already died several times in a row, despair. Her dire situation required some serious thinking about what to do next with her finances, and a saving thought quickly came to Ebel's mind. She could open a candy store. Of course, the faithful servant immediately supported her mistress, who remained with her. Belle had no doubt that the aristocrat's intelligence and skills would lead them to success. Throughout the empire, Desserts were always considered something terrible and were therefore banned for a time. But if only someone decided to bake sweets, there would definitely be no end to them after that. That's why the heroine was so happy that her dream from another world could finally come true. She wasn't even upset by the fact that the only building suitable for a store was in a dilapidated state. No matter what anyone said, the girl was full of hope that her candy shop would become the best in the city. And the assistant had no choice but to support her active mistress in everything. Together, they began to tidy up the premises, which they had acquired for next to nothing. The girls spent a lot of effort to drive out the rats and spiders from the rather old building, but soon their efforts were crowned with success, as the main work was finally completed. Belle had no idea that the old building could be transformed so much with just one cleaning. As a result, the store looked brand new, despite the fact that the premises were built many years ago. Now, the assistant was even more confident that their candy shop would quickly become popular. At that very moment, Ebel heard the ladies from the sidelines discussing her behavior at the wedding. The aristocrats were horrified by the way one noble lady treated the well-known marquise. The heroine wasn't too worried about this because she wanted a different reputation for herself. She had enough moral strength to ignore all the unnecessary gossip about herself. Now, Ebel only had to wait for the first buyer to launch sales. So the girl responded immediately when she heard the doorbell ring. But it turned out to be a less than pleasant guest in the form of an old friend of the aristocrat. The lady was so busy that she completely forgot about this lady, who was known for her love of lies. And once again, Pansy gave a fake smile, trying to play on Abel's feelings, but Miss couldn't throw out the first customers, because a boy came with his friend. It turned out to be her young son, whose manners were many times better than those of his adult mother. The child himself said that his name was Gallic, and he was very happy to meet Ebel. The heroine was instantly delighted at the sight of a boy capable of winning any heart. Pansy wasted no time, as she immediately began to talk about her poor friend's condition. The aristocrat decided that without marriage with Geldry, Ebel could not do anything on her own. All the girl's words settled like poison in the heroine's soul, who became increasingly angry because of this. But Travis couldn't say anything to the first customers, for fear of scaring off the rest of the customers. She merely reminded him that Pansy had so much time on her hands because of her husband's constant infidelities. These words hurt the aristocrat so much that she forgot all her original plans. Pansy refused to believe that her husband was not as faithful to her as she always thought. But at that moment, the heroine was so cruel that she had no intention of sparing the lady's feelings. Grant, of course, couldn't just let such claims go without proper verification, but it was only to the heroine's advantage that the girl eventually left her store alone. Even from her past life, Ebel clearly remembered that she had not been mistaken about her former friend's husband. She personally witnessed the scene of the quarrel when Pansy was sorting things out with her husband's mistress. But the lady completely forgot that Grant had not taken her little son with her. Travis had no idea how to deal with children who were on the verge of hysterics. No matter how smart Gallic was, he was ready to burst into tears because of his mother's absence. Ebel only sighed heavily when she realized that responsibility for the child was now hers. The boy was obedient, so he quickly calmed down when the conversation turned to his mother. Until then, the heroine planned to appease the child with sweets so that he would not be sad. As soon as Gallic tasted the cookies, he was so delighted that his tears dried up. Ebel knew perfectly well that this taste did not exist in this world, because she brought it from her own. The boy was delighted with the sweetness, which he had never tasted before. Like all children, he loved tasty things. But in the Empire, there were too few of them for true enjoyment. That's how, in just a couple of minutes, Ebel easily brought a cheerful smile to the little child's face. The girl couldn't believe that her terrible friend gave birth to such a cute boy. At that moment, she heard the doorbell and decided that it was Pansy who remembered her son. But the reality turned out to be much worse, because Geldry decided to visit the girl with flowers. Ebel wasn't thrilled to see a guy with a bouquet, even though she loved such beautiful flowers. It was important for Benyu to know what exactly he had done wrong that had caused the lady to turn away from him not long ago. The guy was ready to do anything to get back his beautiful bride, who ran away from the wedding. Ebel still had no immunity to such handsome men, but she tried not to give in. The girl remembered too well how much pain this guy had caused her in her past life. That's why she honestly admitted to him that she wasn't even going to look in his direction. Geldry couldn't believe that the girl thought his family were such terrible people. But the lady's face was as serious as ever, so it was clear that she was not lying. Ben-yu needed at least one reason that would explain everything that was happening to him from a logical point of view. Suddenly, Galak stood up for the store owner, amazed by her delicious sweets. The girl was genuinely happy to see how selflessly the boy protected her. Geldry had never fought a child before, so he was noticeably confused by this. Belle then took the lady's side, as she also didn't like the behavior of the pestering Marquise. So the guy didn't have any more chance to talk to the girl in any way. He was thrown out of the store with such speed, as if the Marquise was lighter than a feather. At the same time, the heroine resourcefully kept for herself the beautiful flowers that she actually liked. Ben-yu wasn't used to finding himself at rock bottom so quickly because he was rejected again. But Ebel didn't feel at all sorry for the guy who had trampled all her feelings in the past. At that moment, she noticed that Pansy had wasted no time in seeing Geldry. The girl had long harbored secret feelings for him, although she was married to the Duke of Grant. The aristocrat was so selfish that she completely forgot about her little child. But Galak was used to this kind of thing, so he ran out to meet his wayward mother. One could only wonder why the boy still loved his mother so much. This kind of behavior horrified the heroine, but she had no right to interfere in other people's relationships. Instead, the lady was more concerned that she and Belle had no work the next morning. Ebel thought that people from outside would become interested in her store much faster. But it was only after lunch that the first aristocrat looked into this place with her small children. The girl immediately and joyfully served the client, who became a ray of light for her. However, this lady took only a few sweets for her daughter, and then left silently. So Ebel was once again left without clients, which could not help but worry the young heroine. But literally, an hour later, everything changed dramatically, because customers poured in droves. The heroine barely had time to discuss everything that was beyond her greatest dreams. The lady quickly guessed that all these children learned about her sweets from that very Galak. So her kindness to the boy paid off 1,000,000 times over in one day. Of course, the women brought their children because they really liked the sweets. But this did not change the fact that communication with Galak was beneficial for the responsive Ebel. In just a couple of hours, the heroine learned to communicate perfectly with the kids who liked her. This is how the girl was able to quickly recoup almost the entire cost of creating her candy store. No matter how tired she and her assistant were, both girls were delighted with the result. Their modest sweet shop gradually became more and more popular in various circles. One person, whose story will be known a little later, also did not bypass this place. And before meeting him, all of Ebel's sweets were selling at the same breakneck speed. At the end of the working day, the heroine even allowed the maid to rest, as they were both tired. Unexpectedly, Belle admitted that she initially did not believe in the power of their store. But now the assistant saw how wrong she had been, and that made her emotional. Ebel smiled happily at the girl, once again reminding her that she had promised to free her from poverty. The lady was not angry with the maid, since she herself had doubted her skills several times. But now the guests asked to go into the store even after it closed, which was surprising for the ladies. They couldn't take their eyes off the handsome man who visited their humble sweet spot. The girls had never seen such a handsome and elegant guy in front of them before. This man was in no hurry to give his name, and generally behaved like the owner of this room. But for his striking face, Ebel was ready to forgive the mysterious stranger a lot. However, this time, the unknown person did not insist on service when he was told about the closure. His behavior only surprised the girls more, because the guy left as quickly as he appeared. It turned out that Ebel and Belle had the same tastes, as they liked this man. The girls were only glad that they had more and more in common every day. A few days later, the heroine came up with many more different flavors of sweets to sell. The maid could not believe her eyes when she noticed that her mistress was full of ideas. The girl even personally served customers in order to better establish rapport with them. But this time, the aristocrats were not attracted by the sweets that were in this store. All because that handsome stranger appeared in front of Ebel again, just as unexpectedly. Today, the lady managed to keep her cool and immediately offered the customer several delicious desserts. The guy seemed completely oblivious to the fact that everyone around him was discussing his appearance. His name was Amon Dragon, and today he came to the store just for the famous sweets. The man quickly appreciated the unusual taste, which he had never experienced anywhere in the Empire before. Ebel was only glad that she could match even such a handsome gentleman. Amon acted as if he were at least of royal blood or had come down to earth. He easily created a good impression of himself through his excellent manners and behavior. As soon as the guy treated the aristocrats in the store, they completely went crazy over him. But the guy went much further, because he said that he buys all the sweets in the store. For the first time in her life, Abel met such a rich client, which caused her a real shock. The guy's soft smile attracted my gaze and made it impossible to refuse him. Therefore, the heroine quickly ordered her assistant to fulfill any wish of the rich buyer. The man handled the sweets he had bought so delicately, as if he respected them more than anything in the world. Seeing such behavior, the lady was only more pleased that her food was appreciated. But the girl didn't expect that the stranger had his own insidious plans for the sweets. Only now did Amond introduce himself and admit that he wanted to become the girl's competitor. The heroine suspected something was wrong too late, so she had nowhere to escape from the guy. What bothered the lady most was that Amond hid his last name so as not to reveal his family name. But the aristocrat continued to smile so dazzlingly that the girl could not resist him. Therefore, Miss still gave her name, although she understood that she was now talking to a competitor. In fact, Dragon just now came up with the idea of opening a store specifically in the neighborhood. He wanted to open a coffee shop because the drink was not yet popular in society. Many people had no idea what coffee was, as it was a foreign product. Of course, from her past life, the heroine knew perfectly well what kind of delicious drink it was. So she immediately realized what a strong competitor this handsome man was for her. The girl was unable to say a word to Amond, who quickly disappeared from her sight along with the sweets. The lady's head was already filled with images of an aristocrat opening his own store. And this is what the heroine was most afraid of, because the guy could easily surpass her in sales. Many aristocrats would certainly appreciate the new and tasty drink, but most of all, they would be attracted by the handsome store owner, from whom it is difficult to take your eyes off. It didn't take much intelligence for Ebel to realize how quickly Amond would overtake her in popularity. Many aristocrats would prefer a guy's store, just to look at his beauty, but Dragon knew how to behave so irresistibly that he could easily fool everyone. So in her head, the lady was just one step away from failure, even though she had only recently opened the store. From now on, Amond was Ebel's main rival, whom she intended to quickly crush. Meanwhile, an assistant named Derek could not understand his master's actions. The whole point was that Amond was the king of dragons, but he became interested in humans. That is why Derek, who could turn into a raven, did not accept his master's plans, but Dragon only smiled slyly, as he was carried away by the competition with that funny lady. And the next morning, Geldry was knocking on the door of the shop of his ex-fiancée, who had run away from him. But no matter how many flowers the guy brought, the result remained the same. The heroine was getting pretty fed up with this young man, who didn't understand her confident refusals. It got to the point that the girl had nowhere to put the baskets of flowers that she had been given. The lady had many times regretted accepting flowers from the guy the first time. Geldry acted as if he didn't understand at all why Ebel was so actively avoiding him. As soon as he saw even the girl's serious face, he rejoiced like a little child. Benyu kept trying to prove to Travis that he really did miss her presence to the point of madness. But the heroine didn't feel any pity for the guy from whom she suffered a lot in the past. No matter how much Geldry begged the girl to return, it was all absolutely useless. The guy tried so hard that anyone could sympathize with his sincere and deep grief. But once again, the Marquis heard words that there was no place for him next to his beloved. However, Benyu was not one of those who so quickly forgot about the people he was in love with. Moreover, all the heroine's arguments were weak, because she could not admit to being reincarnated. This time, the lady was distracted from her personal conversation by a client who needed sweets. As a result, Geldry took advantage of the moment and entered the store, although Miss was against it. It turned out that the guy was so famous in society that ladies instantly recognized him. He was ready to communicate with each Benyu so nicely, as if he was determined to build a relationship. Ebel was seething with anger as she watched Geldry cooing with the other ladies. But the guy seemed not to notice Travis's furious gaze, continuing to smile sweetly at the others. Moreover, at some point, the Marquise even invited one of the beautiful aristocrats on a date. This behavior of the ex-fiancé became the last straw for the already enraged heroine. She became so angry that the tense atmosphere around her became noticeable to everyone around her. As a result, Geldry was once again shown the door, although he himself did not have time to understand anything. The next morning, the heroine ordered the maid not to let anyone else into the store. She had no intention of giving the Marquise, who had already become annoying with his appearances, a break. Ebel herself planned to take on the showdown with Amond, who was a worthy competitor. But the girl had never given up at the very beginning, and therefore was not going to start this. To confirm her words, the heroine put on pants that were hidden by the dress. The maid did not approve of this experiment, because it violated all the etiquette of true ladies. But Ebel didn't care about such conventions, since she was ready to do anything for the sake of victory. The girl's entire body was burning with the desire to finally wipe the floor with her main competitor. To begin with, the lady needed to find more assistance, because Belle couldn't cope with all the work. But the day had begun, which meant that customers were happily arriving at the candy store. This time, Gallic was the first to come to the girls, and he was glad to see good friends. The boy acted wiser and brought a nanny with him today instead of his annoying mother. But what surprised Ebel most was that the child had also cleverly brought his friends with him. The kids immediately ran all over the store in search of the sweets that were right for them. The heroine didn't have time to look around before she found herself surrounded by cute children. The lady understood perfectly well that it was Gallica who should be thanked for this people. The boy did a great job as a walking advertisement because he liked the store. Only now did the little boy dare to admit that in the future he would like to help Ebel with cooking. There was so much hope and dream in his eyes that the mist did not dare to disappoint the child. Therefore, the heroine confirmed that with a strong desire, absolutely everything was possible. This again brought Gallic into indescribable delight, because the girl did not drive him away. Until the evening, the girls dealt with orders, encouraging all the requests of small children. It was only towards sunset that they were able to find time for themselves, so they went on a picnic. Nothing foreshadowed trouble on this pleasant evening stroll through the quiet city. But then Belle noticed a familiar aristocrat nearby, with whom she had not spoken before. But Ebel knew very well that Anne Benyu had constantly tormented her in the past for any reason. The lady managed to put a polite smile on her face, although she was already anticipating a serious argument. In fact, the woman tried in various ways to ruin her former daughter-in-law's business. But from the girl's face, she saw that up until now, her affairs with sweets had been going quite well. This did not suit Anne, who wanted to destroy the unpleasant aristocrat as quickly as possible. So the lady burst into the store without an invitation, although the heroine had closed it long ago. Benyu planned to find the girl's weak spot in order to put pressure on her later, so she spewed out poisonous phrases in the hope that the lady would react to something. But the heroine was prepared for such behavior, so she continued to smile back. Anne didn't expect that her rival would be able to maintain an indifferent expression on her face until the very end. But now, Madame was on foreign territory, which Ebel hastened to finally remind her of. The girl was not going to tolerate the annoying client any longer, who had no intention of buying anything. This disrespect caused the aristocrat to fly into a frenzy of rage that usually did not flare up. Only at the very last moment did Geldry, who was wandering nearby, manage to stop his mother. It so happened that at exactly this time, a guy came to the candy store with flowers. This time, the heroine even felt a little grateful to the Marquise for taking his mother with him. Geldry promised to visit the girl a little later, smiling sweetly at her as he said goodbye. But Ebel honestly admitted that she hoped that their meeting would never happen again. The lady was already so tired of the guy's constant visits that she was ready to move away. Only her favorite activity distracted the girl from her nerves, because while cooking, she relaxed. Ebel mixed each ingredient with love, remembering all the proportions perfectly. That is why true culinary works of art were constantly born from her skillful hands. The heroine herself was more than once delighted with how wonderful everything turned out for her. The lady was lucky, and just recently, the emperor lifted the ban on the sale of sweets in the empire. So now Mrs. Little Business was gradually gaining momentum in sales. Belle supported her beloved mistress in everything, as she was delighted with her ideas. It seemed like these two girls could handle any challenge as long as they stayed together. As time went on, the queues at Ebel's store grew longer and brought in a lot of money. The aristocrats never stopped praising the heroine in the hope that she would become their daughter-in-law. It got to the point where Belle had to close the store in front of customers. Before, the heroine would never have thought that all her sweets would quickly fly off the shelves. But now she felt truly happy, because she was doing what she loved. And nothing could spoil the girl's mood and desire to continue developing the candy store. Ebel was constantly coming up with new delicious recipes that she would soon bring to life. But this morning, the lady was unable to get enough sleep because of the loud noise coming from the street. Travis screamed loudly, expressing everything she thought about those who woke up people around her so early. But Miss didn't expect that the reason for this noise would be a completely legal phenomenon. The whole point was that that very competitor was finally opening his establishment next door. Eamon deliberately pretended that he didn't immediately notice the girl approaching him, but in fact, all of the guy's senses were heightened many times more than those of ordinary people. Ebel couldn't argue that the rival's store really did look like something worthwhile. She herself did not expect that she would end up being interested in how everything worked out for her competitor. The guy was bragging about what he had managed to do, and the girl politely praised him in return. In the meantime, Eamon invited the lady as his first customer to his new store. His eyes lit up as he talked about the delicious drinks that could be made from coffee. Because of the guy's beautiful eyes, it was difficult for Ebel to refuse him, although she was against it. Miss tried her best to run away as far as possible, just to avoid being involved in the process. The heroine's plans were to praise only her store, which she doted on. Only Dragon's pleasant compliments made the lady stop in her tracks. The guy easily captured her attention when he admitted that he would like to buy her a coffee. Eamon carefully chose the moment to say the right words to the girl. In the end, the lady fell for it because she could no longer fight the aristocrat. No one had ever communicated with a girl so pleasantly before, even though she was complimented. But no one could resist such a handsome competitor, no matter how hard they tried. So Ebel ran out of arguments before she could understand anything. This is how Miss found herself drawn into an adventure in which she initially did not want to take part. Having nothing better to do, the girl nevertheless began to study the selection in order to order a coffee. But Eamon did not leave Miss alone, as he wanted to impress her to the depths of her soul with his coffee. The first thing the guy did was try to find out what kind of coffee the girl preferred. Lost in her dreams, Ebel actually began to name her preferences, because she was from another world. But the heroine quickly realized that she shouldn't know anything about this drink. The girl's emotions did not escape Dragon, but he could not clearly explain them to himself. In the end, the lady tried to confuse the guy by saying that she just wanted something tasty. Surprisingly, these words did not bother Amand at all, who was confident in his abilities. The guy immediately rushed off to prepare the drink, happy that he would have his first customer. Only now did the heroine notice that all this time she had been wearing her favorite pajamas. With all the things she was doing, she completely forgot about getting herself in order. But it was too late to run away from the handsome man who was diligently preparing a coffee drink for her. The girl remembered very well that the guy made a different impression on her at their first meeting, but he turned out to be a rather pedantic person who approached everything with taste. The lady looked around with white envy, dreaming of such a scale for herself. Soon the coffee was ready, and its appearance and smell were attractive at first sight. Even the cook didn't capture the girl's attention as much as the drink in her hands. Ebel had no hopes for the drink, even though she had really liked it in her past life. But the taste of the latte exceeded all the lady's expectations, and she felt as if she had plunged into a fairy tale. The heroine couldn't hold back her sincere praise when it came to whether she liked the drink. The girl realized too late that she had accidentally revealed all her feelings to a stranger. It turned out that it took Eamon just a few seconds to study all of the girl's preferences. He would have liked to continue this conversation, but Travis could no longer withstand his beautiful gaze. So Ebel quickly ran away, citing that she had her own business to attend to. Within just a couple of days, crowds of admiring aristocrats were constantly gathering outside the coffee shop. At first, they were attracted by the handsome appearance of the owner, who smiled kindly at everyone. But a little later, huge queues really did start to form for the most delicious drink. So Derek had to come to the aid of the gentleman, who could not cope with such a workload. The assistant was wary of the Dragon King being in human company, but Eamon was so carried away by his occupation that he no longer saw himself outside of this pleasant atmosphere. Therefore, Derek had no choice but to indulge all the master's desires. Of course, the girls did not ignore the appearance of the second worker who had recently appeared. They deliberately gave the guy difficult tasks to see how he would complete them. Every time Derek was consumed with shame about this, but he tried to do everything possible for his clients. Meanwhile, the number of customers in the candy store was decreasing every day. Ebel understood the reasons for this perfectly well, but tried to ignore her competitor. But Eamon seemed to be constantly passing under the windows of the candy store, and every time, Belle was invariably happy that she could once again admire the handsome guy. The heroine could do nothing with the maid, who always gave vent to her feelings. But just a little more, and the lady will have no clients left at all due to a powerful competitor nearby. Abel urgently needed to come up with something worthwhile to save his store. Suddenly, a brilliant idea related to coffee finally came to the girl's bright head. The idea was for the two stores to collaborate so that each could continue to exist. In this way, customers will gradually move from coffee to sweets and vice versa. Dragon immediately became interested in the offer that his wise neighbor made to him. But Abel didn't expect that Almond would set her conditions for concluding the agreement. And the first of them was that the lady should from now on call the guy only by his first name. The Dragon King did this because he currently perceived Miss as a victim. If the heroine wanted to save the store, she had no choice, so she agreed. The girl's obedience appeased Amond, who had not expected such a quick result. In fact, this collaboration was doubly beneficial for him, since the guy wanted to communicate. But Ebel was afraid that the aristocrat's last condition might become too serious for her. But Miss only needed to sell some of her sweets to exchange goods. When she saw the price, the heroine decided that she had simply imagined such a large sum at first. But it quickly became clear that Almond was not joking at all when he offered the girl so much money. This offer was so advantageous for Ebel that she made an immediate decision. The lady didn't notice at all how angry the guy became after coming into contact with her handshake. The girl was so happy about the successful contract that she didn't pay attention to anything else. Only in the evening did she wonder whether her decision had been too hasty. But it was too late to change anything, because Miss wanted to promote her sweet business. So Ebel attributed Amon's easy consent to the fact that he was impressed by her beauty. What the girl didn't expect was the huge number of love letters and gifts. The heroine simply sold sweets, but turned out to be popular among the male population. Thanks to the collaboration with Amond, customers quickly returned to the candy store, and the lady knew for sure that no one needed her when she had almost no money. That's why Ebel didn't believe any letter in which men confessed their love to her. But then, an unknown man appeared, and the girl did not dare to ignore his letter. All because the lady was approached to introduce the imperial family with a small invitation to the ball. Ebel couldn't believe her eyes when she actually saw the seal on the modest envelope. Miss knew that she quickly became popular, but the attention from the prince was surprising to her. The heir specifically sent a detachment of knights so that the miss could not refuse him. If it weren't for that whole crowd, the heroine would never have believed that the sender was the prince. It turned out that the guy would like to try Ebel sweets during the imperial tea party. Bane Rakim was famous for never backing down from his goal once he had set his mind to something. So, Ebel was predictably frightened by the fact that the prince himself deigned to write her an invitation. Naturally, when the lady learned about the sender, she could not refuse the upcoming tea party. But something surprised the heroine even more, because the messengers were in no hurry to leave her store. The whole point was that the knight was eager to try Ebel's desserts too. The heroine's inner salesperson immediately took over, so she invited the knights to take a look at the goods. The boys quickly divided themselves between the shelves and began to choose sweets for themselves with interest. All this reminded the girl that previously, the fashion for bony people was popular in society. So for a long time, no one was allowed to have desserts, which made many people happier. As soon as the knights left, the girl was overcome with the realization of the situation she had found herself in. But the neighboring store had no idea about the honor that Ebel had been awarded. Amond laughed heartily at the assistant, who grumbled but did his job well. Derek wasn't used to being a store manager, which is why it was so difficult for him. At exactly that moment, the heroine ran to her friend to tell him her good news. For some reason, Ebel had no doubt that the guy would be happy with this information along with her. But suddenly, Amond frowned when he heard that the lady was invited to the imperial palace. Dragon himself couldn't explain why this news caused him so much worry. The heroine expected the guy to be happy for her, but noticed that this did not happen. The girl attributed all this to the fact that the prince did not invite her handsome rival to tea. Derek came to the gentleman's aid and showed enough joy for this event. He pulled Amond away in time so that the boy wouldn't ruin anything with his upset. In fact, the assistant was unhappy with the fact that the owner had such poor control over his emotions. This was the first time in the life of the Dragon King, because he had never interacted with people before. Dragon himself understood perfectly well how important it was not to show his true feelings. But this invitation from the imperial palace inevitably made him very nervous. The dragons had had problems with the royal dynasty all their lives, so the guy didn't trust them. That's why it was so difficult for Eamon to be happy for the girl, no matter how much he wanted to support her. Only Derek's reminders that the gentleman needed to smile improved the situation a little. They couldn't talk for too long, because they left the girl all alone in their store. The heroine really did get bored, which is why she became immersed in various unpleasant thoughts. But the appearance of friends immediately dispelled all the worries of the lady, who began to doubt their feelings. This time, Aemond was able to pretend that he was happy for Miss, although in reality he was worried. But now Ebel needed support, and her former competitors were able to say important words for the lady. The heroine had fun watching Derek and Aemond try to run the store. She had been running her establishment for a little longer, but she saw that the guys were doing a good job of selling. At that moment, in the palace, the prince was eagerly awaiting a meeting with the girl who baked sweets. It was important for the guy to meet her, as rumors about her delicacies had spread throughout the empire. His little sisters did nothing but beg him to buy them at least one dessert from the store. It was only for their sake that Bane called Ebel, although he knew perfectly well that he could scare her away. Many girls were scared of the guy as soon as they saw the terrible scar on his face. Word of Travis's invitation to tea quickly spread among the aristocratic women of high society. They did not envy the girl very much, since they knew how ugly the prince looked. None of the ladies knew whether the heir would ever be able to find a partner in life. In her past life, Ebel had never met the prince, so she couldn't understand why everyone was afraid of him. The lady herself was only worried about the unpleasant Benyu family, so she was ready for a lot. But her assistant couldn't cope with her fear, because she didn't go to such events. The heroine tried her best to support the maid, showing her a good example with her smile. But Belle was desperate to stay at the store, even though they had found a replacement in their absence. Their little argument was interrupted by the appearance of the imperial carriage, which had arrived for the two guests. Ebel was full of anticipation, because it was a great honor for her to visit the imperial palace. Therefore, the girl had no doubt that she had made the right decision with her consent. The lady managed to infect everyone around her with her optimism, so that Belle soon felt better. As soon as the girls arrived at the place, they were met by one of the best servants of the imperial family. Ebel deliberately lied that her maid was an aristocrat, so that they could get through. The heroine was not ashamed of this little lie, because she could not imagine herself without an assistant. Only in Belle's presence could the lady continue to joke and laugh cheerfully in moments of fear. She herself didn't really know what to expect from this tea party with the imperial family, but in her past life, the lady had experienced great difficulties, so now she was ready for anything. As soon as the girl showed up for tea, the aristocrats began discussing her past. But many of the girls agreed that the current merits of the lady with the store outweighed everything. Ebel accepted with dignity the praise that no one dared to voice to her face. She was sure that her parents would have been happy with her if they had remained alive. In the meantime, the girl tried to blend in with the crowd of invited aristocrats who were waiting for the emperor. In the meantime, Miss did not refuse to try some of the imperial cuisine's desserts, but the food turned out to be so disgusting that it exceeded all the heroine's worst expectations. Only now did she understand why none of the aristocrats had tried these sweets. But soon a prince appeared at the tea party who freed people from the need to eat anything. The guy looked modest and could have been called handsome if not for the huge scar on his face. At the sight of the heir, Belle immediately cowardly hid behind the lady, who was standing calmly. Ebel immediately felt the powerful pressure that emanated from the heir to the throne. But the guy himself didn't seem dangerous to her, despite his menacing appearance. So it was no trouble for Ebel to politely greet Bane, whom many feared. But the girl didn't expect the guy to admit that he hadn't invited her to the event for nothing. The whole thing was that Princesses Lily and Tilly were madly eager to try the sweets from the store, and the caring brother did everything to ensure that the girls were satisfied with the sweets. What surprised the heroine most was that the imperial family gave her a place next to them. Now, the girl's task was not to lose face in front of such important people. The lady behaved naturally and did not notice that Bane was watching her with surprise. It so happened that among all those invited, only the heroine was given such a great honor. Even members of the imperial family were interested in the sweets prepared by the young lady. Therefore, the emperor and empress could not ignore the appearance of a talented pastry chef. Bane took on the responsibility of introducing the store owner to his parents. But this time, the guy had a hard time collecting his thoughts, as he was embarrassed by the girl's behavior. Ebel looked at the air without a drop of fear in her eyes, which was the first time that happened to him. Every moment, it seemed to Rakim that the lady was about to get scared of his face, but this never happened, as the girl happily talked about her desserts. At that moment, Ebel shone like never before, because the conversation was about her favorite thing in life. So the rulers were satisfied after the girl's brief presentation of her desserts. In fact, the emperor and empress loved sweets, but for a long time they could not afford them. But now, even the strict woman showed emotion, sincerely admiring the taste. Immediately after their mother, the girls dared to try the dessert and were also delighted. The entire imperial family was ready to bow at Ebel's feet for such a culinary masterpiece. Soon all the sweets from the heroine's shop were served to the other aristocrats as well. The servants carried the desserts carefully so as not to accidentally damage any of them. Ebel did a great job, as she prepared a large amount of varied food. As a result, the emperor even offered the girl to become his personal chef at the palace. The heroine froze in place in surprise, as few could boast of such a prestigious achievement. The position of imperial chef was always considered one of the most vacant in society. But Ebel couldn't agree, because she had her own plan for life. So the lady asked permission to make a counter-proposal that could satisfy everyone. Most of all, the lady's slight impudence and confidence surprised Bane, who invited her. The emperor had never before encountered someone making up something different based on his words. For a moment, the heir was even afraid that his father might suddenly become angry with the lady. The heroine's idea was to make deliveries to the imperial palace. Such a proposal could indeed allow both parties to get what they wanted at once. Bane wasn't sure he could have come up with anything better than the girl's brilliant plan. His father came to the same conclusion, so he happily agreed to cooperate with the lady. That's how easily and simply the heroine signed a contract with the imperial family itself. In fact, Miss could hardly believe that what was happening was quite real. Immediately after this meeting, the girl hurried to disappear among the ladies, so as not to attract attention. She had already shown herself to the emperor and the heir, who remembered her well. The ruler was not so simple, because he noticed his son's sympathy towards Ebel. The man would like the heir not to miss such an excellent chance to get closer to the girl. That's why he created all the conditions for Bane, including signing a contract with the girl. Meanwhile, in the main hall, some aristocrats had already attacked Ebel with their attention. No matter how hard the heroine tried to hide from people, she still found herself at the center of discussions. Suddenly, the boys froze in place, and their eyes reflected genuine fear of the girl. It turned out that this happened because the heir himself decided to join Ebel. Despite his high status, the guy could barely ask the girl to dance with him. Ebel didn't find any reason to refuse, because this man was nicer than the others. The heroine was not at all afraid of the heir, despite the fact that his appearance frightened many. The guy did not miss this peculiarity of the girl, which increasingly attracted his attention. Ever since the prince approached Ebel, no one dared to come closer to her. So Geldry had to come to terms with the fact that he wouldn't be able to talk to his beloved today. All because Rakim clearly had no intention of sharing today's main guest with anyone. But the heroine didn't look like someone who was very worried about this. Instead, the girl genuinely enjoyed dancing with a man of such high status. It was only when evening came that Ebel was finally able to get out into the fresh air alone. The lady did this also because Belle needed time to communicate with a nice guy. So Miss took advantage of the fact that no one could see her and took off her shoes, which she had grown tired of during the day. But the heroine didn't expect that her loneliness would suddenly be broken by some guy. This mysterious masked stranger appeared suddenly, but seemed quite friendly. So Ebel didn't object when he joined her in the imperial garden. For some reason, this man seemed vaguely familiar to the girl, although she could not recognize him. Curiosity made the lady stay close to the young man, who did not want to show her his face. But the stranger was clearly familiar with the lady, since he remembered that she was the owner of a candy store. As a result, the lady herself did not notice how this attractive man persuaded her to dance. In the process, the girl learned that the guy was not on good terms with the imperial family, so he was glad that at least someone kept him company outside of tea drinking. But their meeting did not last long, since the young man soon needed to run away somewhere. As if enchanted, Ebel watched every action of the stranger who intrigued her. Therefore, the heroine hastened to find out the name of the man who ran away from her so quickly. Instead of an answer, Miss was overcome by a slight smile, as the guy promised to tell her his name next time. So the girl was left alone again. But now all her thoughts were filled with a new friend. The heroine always loved everything mysterious, and this stranger completely matched her taste. So she remembered this beautiful mask, completely covered in glitter, for a long time. The next morning, Ebel remembered all her gardening skills from her past life. At that time, she was quite successful in growing plants, doing it only as a hobby. So the lady visited the imperial garden, although she was sad that she could not take this beauty. When it was time for her to return to the store, the prince personally came out to see the girl off. Ebel was only glad that this pleasant man gave her a few good parting words. She would gladly visit the palace again, if only she were ever invited again. It remained a mystery to the lady why Bane was so stubbornly avoided by all the other aristocrats. Ebel didn't think the scar on the guy's face was anything terrible, as he remained a good person. But now the lady was more worried about the fact that her maid had spent a lot of time with some guy. Belle reacted vividly to the mention of her gentleman, as he had clearly sunk into her soul in a short time. Upon her return, Miss herself visited the man. She couldn't help but think about all the time for tea. Ebel had so much news that she could never share it all with her friend at once. The heroine was so inspired that she didn't notice the depressed mood of Derek's assistant. But the girl noticed that this time, Amond was much more cheerful in his conversations with her on absolutely any topic. As soon as she mentioned this, the guy admitted that he was simply glad to see his good friend. Of course, the heroine was embarrassed by such words, but she did not dare to reciprocate the guy's feelings. Instead, the heroine awkwardly joked it off, hoping it would hide the slight blush on her cheeks. Until the very end, the girl did not believe that the guy was really glad to see her after so much time. She hurried to leave the Allied store, as she still had a lot of her own things to do. Amon diligently waved to the lady from the window until she was completely out of sight. The Dragon King fell in love with this girl more and more, and he could do nothing about this circumstance. But Derek had no desire to help the master confess to the human girl, but Dragon knew very well how his assistant could be bribed. Therefore, the guy had no doubt that Derek would not leave him in such a difficult situation. Soon the dessert, which the imperial family liked, became known throughout society. That's why crowds of people appeared in front of the girl's shop, wanting to try this sweet treat. She made so much money from this that she couldn't believe her eyes. So the lady even gave a prize to Belle, who worked tirelessly with her. That night, the heroine slept so sweetly because she had a large sum of money in the safe. Only in the morning, it turned out that all the money had somehow magically disappeared. Naturally, Ebel immediately filed a report about this with all law enforcement agencies. The lady had some money left in the bank, but this could not save the situation with the disappearance. The heroine did not expect such meanness from the people she delighted with sweets. As soon as she told Amond about this, he immediately supported his injured friend. Miss didn't believe that the missing item could be found, since there were no cameras around the store. But the guy acted as if he had one surefire plan to find the missing money. His behavior interested the girl, who had already begun to plunge into the abyss of despair. Abel couldn't miss any opportunity if there was a chance to get her money back. But Amond was torn between the desire to help his colleague and the fear that she would be afraid of him. Therefore, he took a promise from the aristocrat that she would not turn away from him, no matter what happened. So that night they visited the candy store, where nothing had changed. But Dragon did not come empty-handed, because he had a special potion with him. The guy spilled a few drops on the floor, and the desired traces immediately appeared below. The heroine saw something like this for the first time in her life, but she was not afraid, because Amond was trying to help her. The Dragon King felt better when he realized that the girl had no intention of moving away from him. Only the footprint without shoes aroused the suspicion of the friends, as it led in a slightly different direction. They bravely followed him in the hope that the money would still be safe and sound. But the lady did not expect that the tracks would lead them to one of the night taverns of this big city. In fact, it was logical that the criminal could not have taken all his money somewhere else. However, Ebel was frightened by the fact that the man had already drunk everything he could steal from her. As soon as Amond appeared on the threshold of the tavern, many of the visitors quickly recognized him. They were delighted to notice that this time, the guy was in the company of a nice lady. But today, Dragon had no desire to have a nice chat with the tavern's customers. With one brutal look, he drove everyone away, thereby quickly clearing the room. And only the tavern owner was forced to remain where he was. But our heroes suspected him. Ebel couldn't take it anymore, so she angrily attacked the man who didn't understand anything. The tavern owner could pretend as much as he wanted that he didn't understand what was being discussed. It was for this occasion that Amon took with him a little more of the potion, which showed traces. The man did not expect that the guests would have magical abilities, which he greatly feared. Dragon's face showed no sign of sympathy for the thief who dared to offend his friend, and the marks that appeared on the floor worked many times better than any, even the harshest and most terrible sentence. Therefore, the merchant had no choice but to admit his guilt in the hope of forgiveness. But this time, the heroine had no intention of forgiving the man who might steal something again. Suddenly, the man pushed the girl away with all his strength, trying to escape the crime scene. But Amon's reaction was many times faster, and he didn't even have to catch the merchant to do it. The man himself fell to the floor because of the footrest and was no longer able to get up to escape. But Dragon was only concerned about Ebel's condition, which was actually fine. The girl's heart beat joyfully in anticipation because they had found the malicious criminal so easily. Literally, an hour later, the friends handed the dealer over to the police so they could deal with him further. But what pleased the lady most was that all her money was in perfect order. In her joy, the heroine almost kissed the guy who had given her so much support. But Amand only wanted Miss to continue to affectionately call him by his first name. A little later, the lady again recalled all the circumstances of their night adventure over money. Then, just in case, the guy gave the girl a ball that guarded her entire house with the help of magic. Ebel was even more delighted with the gift that could save her from robberies. But the question naturally arose in the girl's head. Who was her good friend and ally? It felt like the guy was good in whatever field he took on. He even dealt with the criminal so bravely that he tried to escape from the crime scene. Despite the open store, Amond had enough money to live on and not work at all. Therefore, Ebel asked with excitement what kind of family her lifelong friend represented. But the lady didn't expect that the guy would cleverly avoid answering, citing the late hour. This situation did not give the heroine any peace, since she suspected something was wrong with Amand. In the end, the miss decided that she shouldn't care about anything as long as the guy doesn't do anything bad. The next morning, the prince again found it difficult to concentrate sufficiently on the important imperial work, all because the little sisters attacked him, sincerely wanting to taste something sweet. It was only when the maid took the babies that Bane found it a little easier to work with the paperwork. The whole thing was that the young mischievous girls ran away from their assistant, and she was looking for them everywhere. In fact, Reckham wrote the letter for Ebel not because the girls persuaded him to do so. Lily and Tilly were just an excuse for the prince to write to that girl again. Only the maid saw how much her master desired this meeting with the store owner. But the guy was always stopped by the fact that his face was adorned with a huge and ugly scar. It was a mark obtained during the final, brutal battle with a powerful dragon. And since then, the guy was afraid that he would never be able to find a suitable partner for himself. But with the appearance of Ebel in his life, a lot changed, because the girl added confidence. Meanwhile, the heroine's affairs were going even better, since she used her thief as advertising. Today, the girl had one of the important guests, as Gallic came into her store with his nanny. The lady was always glad to see the boy, whose behavior caused her sincere delight. But this time, son Grant brought friends with him, who were visibly embarrassed and a little scared. What bothered Miss most was that these children's parents had recently been sent to prison. The heroine couldn't help but remember that her kidnapper had just been talking about his poor children. For a long time, the man justified himself by saying that he barely had enough money to feed his family. But at that moment, the girl did not believe that the merchant had been telling her the truth all this time. And now, these children were asking to work for Ebel in order to earn at least a little money for themselves. Of course, Miss could not refuse the children, whose poor fate she herself had contributed to. Although hiring children was not a very good idea, they would make excellent couriers. The kids were ready for any job, and their enthusiasm was clearly reflected on their little faces. It even got to the point that Ebel was inspired to create a new sweet in their image. Many children were delighted with the gingerbread men, which everyone liked. What can we say about the unearthly taste of sweets, which literally made people freeze in their tracks? So the heroine's business was going well, because her store was always full of wealthy customers with children. The only thing that worried Ebel was that she still hadn't been able to thank Omont for his recent help. The girl was not one of those who could calmly forget how someone wasted time on her. But when the lady had the idea, it turned out that only Derek was in the coffee shop. Any other girl would have been upset by this, but the heroine was distinguished by her enormous patience. It so happened that she was lucky. and Eamon suddenly appeared right on the threshold of the store. Miss was embarrassed because she did not hear the sound of hooves from the approaching carriage. But Ebel was so eager to offer even greater cooperation that she quickly forgot about everything. Only Derek remained aloof, although he did not understand why his master was bothering so much with this lady. The guy had already regretted 100 times that he had left the warm palace to help the Dragon King. Soon, since Ebel already had many workers, Eamon decided to buy a couple for himself. But Derek only selected girls, since they were the ones who mostly asked for work. The guy would never have been able to admit that he hired people purely according to his own taste. Meanwhile, Eamon tried to open up to his young partner from different sides. For the first time in a long time, the guy gave the lady a tour of the entire premises of his store. But their idyll was interrupted once again by Derek's grumbling, who had something to say. Raven saw perfectly well that the coffee shop had been operating at a loss for quite some time. As a true money hunter, the guy was not happy with this strange business situation. But the Demon King believed that everything would be fine as long as Ebel had money. His infatuation with this cheerful girl grew stronger and stronger, and this was stressing out his assistant. As usual, in the morning, the heroine treated all her friends to sweets that she had recently invented. The girl needed an expert opinion on whether they were leaving them for sale, but Eamon always lost his critical thinking around the lady, so he couldn't help her in any way. The heroine was constantly surprised by the fact that the guy was ready to eat absolutely any of her desserts. She sincerely didn't understand whether her ally really loved sweets that much. Until now, Ebel has not come any closer to figuring out who her friend really was. The girl had so many worries that she didn't even have time to develop a detective theory. Lately, everyone has been talking about her trip to the palace to see the prince, who was known as a terrible person. The aristocrats, who had never seen the heir, imagined him as a real tyrant. Ebel knew how far the ladies were from the truth, but she couldn't convince everyone around her. Every evening was the same for Miss, as she constantly burned love letters from Geldry. The guy wrote confessions with such frequency that any typewriter would envy him. The heroine would prefer to get rid of the Marquise, whose appearances brought confusion. But she didn't expect that Belle would suddenly have a couple of surprises in store for her mistress. Lately, the lady had been so focused on her work that she hadn't noticed the maid's behavior. So it came as a surprise to her when the girl became engaged to an aristocrat named Bryce Dan. What frightened the heroine most was the speed with which her assistant made such an important decision. But it turned out that the maid even managed to meet the parents of the guy who accepted her. The heroine had no right to disappoint Belle in love, because she would not listen to her now. All the servant needed from her mistress was a blessing for the wedding she was expecting. Until now, thoughts about her assistant tormented Ebel, and she couldn't help but worry about her. It was clear from the girl's face how much she worried about little things, so this time, the lady didn't even burn all the letters, since she had completely lost touch with reality. It took Miss a moment to notice that Eamon had come to meet her and wanted to talk a little. As soon as the guy heard something about marriage, he froze in place in fear and horror. Dragon could not even imagine that his beloved would decide to marry another. There was no one to explain to Eamon that in fact, he had completely misunderstood everything. Even the usually resourceful assistant could not now dispel the master's sudden sadness. Derek couldn't leave things like that, so he rushed to the lady who was always ready to talk. The guy honestly admitted to the girl that his boss had been acting strangely lately. Ebel quickly became aware of the boy's anxiety, as he couldn't find a place for himself either. Eamon was truly out of his mind, only constantly sighing sadly when he couldn't do anything. Dragon didn't even try to cheer himself up, despite all the tricks of his skilled assistant. The heroine immediately realized that her ally had changed so much after his recent night meeting with her. The idea instantly flashed through the girl's mind that the guy could very well have fallen in love. But Miss found it hard to believe that Eamon really had feelings for her. But even the thought of this significantly raised the girl's ego. Because the guy was handsome, she promised Derek to talk to his boss personally because the guy couldn't do anything. Previously, the heroine diligently ran away from any lovers. But now, for some reason, this did not frighten her. She still suspected Eamon of something, because she knew nothing about his real family. After meeting Geldry, Miss always felt like all the handsome guys were onto something. Eventually, it got to the point that even Belle noticed the strange state of her usually calm mistress. The assistant was seriously alarmed by the fact that Ebel was pale, as if she was very tired. As a result, everything came down to a conversation about Belle's upcoming wedding, which she was happy about. The maid had long since become convinced that her lover could certainly be trusted. Therefore, the heroine did not interfere with the developing romance, even though it was so fast-paced. Instead, Ebel supported the maid, promising to prepare many delicious dishes for her wedding. Meanwhile, Amond was still in the same terrible mood, and nothing made him happy. But as soon as the guy heard the quiet steps of his beloved girl, he instantly blossomed into a smile. All day, Dragon had been missing Ebel's presence, and now she finally appeared before him. True, along the way, the heroine didn't even have time to think about what exactly she would talk to the guy about. As usual, Miss told Amond about the good sales, and her friend was able to rejoice for her. Suddenly, Dragon heard that it was Belle who was supposed to get married soon. The guy couldn't believe his ears, because he thought that the lady had been worried about her marriage that night. But it turned out that Ebel wasn't even thinking about marriage, because she was passionate about her business. Due to work, the girl had no time to go on dates, but she was not sad about it. The realization that the lady was still free pleased Amond as never before. He was only glad that he had made such a serious mistake recently and still had a chance. A few hours later, the heroine returned to her place, still thinking about the handsome guy. The girl noticed that Amond had definitely fallen in love with her, but did not want to take the first step. But Derek hoped until the very end that the gentleman was only temporarily infatuated with that girl. But Dragon's radiant smile made it clear that he had completely lost his head over love. The assistant was horrified that the Dragon King had developed feelings for a human girl. Amond was as radiant as ever, and the work now progressed rapidly in his capable hands. Initially, the king perceived people only as interesting toys to observe. He was amazed to see how quickly they were developing their culture in different ways. And soon, Dragon himself did not notice how he found himself drawn into the human world out of curiosity about it. What struck the guy most was that people were constantly spreading rumors about each other. None of the dragons had ever done anything like this, so any news was new to the guy. This is how it happened that Amond became interested in Ebel, about whom many people had said a lot. At first, the girl didn't seem special to him, because she wasn't even incredibly beautiful, but her ability to speak delicious desserts instantly captivated the dragon to the depths of his soul. So the king himself did not notice how deeply interested he became in this young lady from the pastry shop. Initially, the guy thought that he would only open his own store nearby for a short time, for the sake of the game. But a close acquaintance with this girl radically changed all his plans for the future life. Ebel became someone who ignored any prejudices and was friends with everyone. Therefore, Amond quickly became involved in this friendship and even began to desire something more. But Dragon wasn't the only one who noticed this unusual feature of Travis, who communicated with everyone. Once again, the girl was invited to the palace, where the girls demanded sweets from everyone. Bane eagerly walked out to meet the girl, who was gradually gaining all his attention. But Ebel had no idea why the prince had actually invited her to visit. She spoke enthusiastically about the desserts she had brought with her this time. The girl was even able to name several products that she used directly from the plants. Both princesses were delighted with the sweets, which became better each time. Even Rakim, with his many years of experience, had never seen anyone make sweets so skillfully. But everything came so easily to the heroine, as if there had been nothing complicated about this matter from the very beginning. But the lady wasn't prepared for the question of how she knew so much about ingredients. The whole point was that in her past life, the heroine had studied this skill extensively in courses. But there was nothing like it in this world, so Bane considered Mrs. Skills a real miracle. It was only because the guy turned out to be talkative that Ebel managed to quickly change the unpleasant topic. This time, Raheem immediately tried the desserts that the girl had brought with her with pleasure. Travis enjoyed seeing people around her, enjoying her culinary creations. It all got to the point where the heir didn't want to let the girl go back to the store. But the lady could not stay in the palace overnight, because more work was waiting for her in the morning. What surprised the heroine most was that at the right moment, the guy gave her some kind of gift. As soon as Ebel opened it, she froze in place from the sheer shock that was written on her face. Bane did his best and bought the girl an incredibly expensive and exquisite necklace. Travis's honesty prevented her from accepting such a precious gift, which she felt was undeserved. But this time, the prince had no intention of backing down, because the necklace was a kind of proposal. Ebel realized with horror that this guy had also recently had feelings for her. This is why Bane would like to see the girl as his wife in the future. Rekim's problem was that he forgot to ask what the lady really wanted. So with his stubbornness, he drove Ebel into a corner, and she meekly accepted this gift. The guy himself had no idea that his actions had only further alienated Miss from himself. Everyone around had already noticed the young man's budding love, so they were happy for him. Bane was a shy guy by nature, so he didn't really talk about his feelings. However, he had to admit to his mother that he had managed to give her an expensive necklace. At first, the woman was not against it, because it meant that her son was ready to marry. But she was not pleased with the fact that Bane had turned his attention to the aristocrat from the pastry shop. As expected, the Empress did not like the difference in status, but she said nothing. However, the heir understood everything perfectly well without words, because his mother wanted a different pair for him. But the guy couldn't get Ebel out of his head, and there was no incredible joy on her face. Only now did the prince begin to worry that he might have ruined his relationship with the girl. That evening, the heroine really couldn't take her eyes off the expensive gift. She remembered well how serious the heir had been when he handed her this jewel. But the girl wasn't ready for marriage, let alone ruling an empire. Ebel had long been accustomed to the fact that many could consider her pretty because of her appearance. But the acquired popularity exceeded all the lady's expectations, since she had so many suitors. The next morning, the lady needed Amon's magic because she wanted to try a new recipe. But the guy, out of spite, did not agree to all the financially beneficial offers. What surprised Miss most was that he simply wanted to call her by her first name freely. This permission cost Ebel nothing, so she eagerly agreed to these conditions. The girl was much more interested in business, but she couldn't avoid the goosebumps that came down her spine from hearing its name. Travis quickly became embarrassed by the sexual pressure her ally was putting on her. Amond only became more amused at Travis's reaction, but tried not to overdo it. No matter how sweet the hot-tempered Ebel seemed to him, the guy would like to maintain a relationship with her. This time, the lady needed ice magic to keep people from burning their tongues on hot chocolate. Ebel's idea was sure to please everyone due to its original simplicity. Amond never ceased to be amazed at how brilliant the girl's thoughts were. She not only came up with the drink, but also figured out how to get children involved in it. The heroine was completely confident that no one would be able to refuse the new season's product. She gave the honor of trying the drink first to her friend to see his reaction. The guy liked the smell of hot chocolate, so he drank it without a shadow of apprehension. The result exceeded all expectations, as the taste of the drink was beyond praise. Derek watched the gentleman's amusement from the side, but did not say anything to him yet. As soon as Ebel left, Amond obediently returned to business. Happy that the store was thriving, the assistant could not remain silent about the fact that it was he who put so much effort into development. Once again, Derek faced injustice and devaluation from his owner. The Raven amazed the Dragon King by eagerly awaiting their return to the palace, but Amon did not want to stay away from such a radiant and beautiful girl. Therefore, no matter how loudly Derek shouted, it was difficult for the gentleman to return home. Meanwhile, the Raven remembered too well how cruel the wars between people and dragons were. But for all his advice, the guy only received a dry rag across the face, which made him shut up. Dragon knew much better than he did how soon his return to the palace was necessary. No matter how much the boy now wanted to abandon his duties, he was a king. That is why Amond, more than anyone else, had a premonition of a possible war with people. Soon the very day of Belle's wedding arrived, which the girl had been incredibly looking forward to. The heroine stood next to the maid, as she would never have missed such a moment. True, Ebel still couldn't believe that she would have to let her assistant go for a while. But the lady did not despair, because Belle had prudently found a temporary replacement for herself. Moreover, the maid believed that her beloved mistress could be trusted to Amond. Although the ladies did not know the guy's identity, he had already established himself as a good person. So Belle hoped that one day Ebel would consider Amond as her fiancé. But the heroine herself knew that this would not happen soon, because she had other plans now. For several more hours, the girls waited impatiently for the groom to appear. But soon Travis suspected something was wrong, because the guy showed no signs of life. From that moment on, Ebiel could no longer sit silently in place, waiting for something unknown. As soon as the maid looked behind the curtains, she discovered that her fiancé was nowhere to be found. Before, Belle could never have imagined that the guy would suddenly leave her right on her wedding day. The heroine instantly felt a surge of rage at the fact that the aristocrat had acted in this way. The lady was seriously determined to deal with Bryce personally if she met him again. Suddenly, the girls noticed one of the assistants lying tied up on the floor. None of them expected this, since the maid had not made a sound before. But now she came to her senses and screamed loudly that Dan had recently been kidnapped. The heroine could never have predicted such a turn of events, as she was only thinking about the bad. But it turned out that the groom had not abandoned his bride at all, as the maid had already thought. Belle felt sick that Bryce was suddenly kidnapped right before their wedding. Within minutes, police officers had filled the entire wedding venue. The ladies watched the knights work with alarm as they tried to find any clues. The men were confident that they would soon find Bryce, as he was actively resisting. Moreover, the boys' relatives did not stand aside, calling on as many people as possible to join the search. Ebel had never seen such a large number of search engines, which amazed her. It turned out that the Dan family had much more influence than Travis initially thought. They even sent helpers to calm the bride of their missing master. There wasn't a drop of makeup left on Belle's face due to the amount of tears she had shed. Soon the knights managed to catch the criminals who kidnapped the boy for ransom. The kidnappers did not particularly resist their capture, as they did not want to aggravate their punishment. But Belle couldn't find her fiancé anywhere, even though it was said that they had managed to find him during this time. The whole point was that the guy remained unconscious in his warm bed for several more hours. But as soon as he came to his senses, the maid attacked her beloved with emotion. Ebel secretly watched the newlyweds from the side and saw how much they loved each other. Their sincere smiles gave the lady hope that this couple would be happy until the very end. In the end, Belle's wedding still took place, although it happened a few hours later. Travis not only gave the couple money, but also personally baked a huge and delicious cake. On this day, everyone had fun until they dropped, and smiles never left the faces of the invited people. Ebel confidently participated in every competition and even managed to emerge victorious in many. She sincerely hoped that Belle would be happily married to this sweet man. But in the end, the girl drank so much that she barely made it to her own store. The lady wasted some more time trying to open the door with trembling hands. As a result, Ebel got angry and picked the lock, remembering about the protection too late. But Amand warned that his gift would make a loud noise when penetrated. At this time, the prince recalled the long story that happened between dragons and people. Each time it all ended in bloody wars, which the heir remembered well. But the last years passed surprisingly quietly, although the heir was secretly preparing for war. The scar on his face was a constant reminder of how terrifying the dragons had been when they had temporarily gone silent. His father was also seriously injured during the battle, which he remembered for the rest of his life. That is why he placed so much hope in young Bane, in whom he saw a wonderful heir. The guy was not prepared for the fact that his ceremony was scheduled for tomorrow. But the father was only happy for his son, who had grown up to be such a worthy contender for the throne. He even allowed Rakim to invite the very lady whom the empress disliked so much. The emperor understood human emotions well, so he saw that Bane fell in love with that lady. No matter how much the boy denied his feelings, from that moment on, it was all useless for his father. Because of his ugly appearance, the heir often didn't even try to communicate with girls. At this time, the heroine was faced with an extremely difficult choice in her third life. In one hand, the girl held a magic ball, thoughtfully given to her by Amand for protection, and next to the lady lay a beautiful necklace, which she had received from the prince not long ago. Ebel couldn't believe that there really were so many good men around her, but everything was complicated by the fact that Miss was not planning to get married anytime soon. Things were just getting better at her store, in part because of a new assistant named Holt. The lady was delighted with the guy Belle had picked up, as she herself was going on a trip. The fiery commoner infected everyone around him with his bright energy and kind smile. This man had already managed to save the heroine during one unpleasant situation with a client. As soon as Holt appeared next to the lady who came from Benyu, she no longer visited the store. But the heroine was only glad that there was one less bad person among her clients. Moreover, the new assistant was surprisingly good at handling advertising on the city streets. So Ebel just looked out the window impatiently, waiting for the long-awaited clients to arrive. It was only towards evening that the lady felt a strange emptiness inside and a desire to drink a latte. The heroine herself did not expect to feel longing for Amand, whom she had not seen all day. This guy was still some unknown person to her, because he didn't say anything about himself. In contrast, the prince seemed practically an open book, as he was known to everyone. However, during the coronation, the girl still decided to return the necklace given to her. But the miss could not take her eyes off the prince, who had been appointed such a high title. Ebel watched with delight as her majestic friend held his head up proudly. All this time, Bane was looking for Ebel in the crowd of people, with whom he would like to talk later. This made the girl feel awkward, because she had planned to return the heir's gift. At the most inopportune moment, the heroine heard Geldry's annoying voice somewhere in the crowd. The guy was ready to swear that he had recently seen the pink top of his ex-daughter-in-law's head. But the heroine did not plan to communicate with him, so she ran away from the ceremony too early. Information about this reached the prince, who a little later tried to find the girl. The guy took her behavior personally, no matter how much the assistant tried to console him. The worst part was that Bane didn't even have anyone to ask for relationship advice. It wasn't just Rakim who was grieving at that moment, because Travis was ready to die out of shame. Not only did she not give up the necklace, but she also realized that she missed her ally. At exactly this time, the guy suddenly appeared in front of the lady who was whispering his name all alone. The lady could not hide from her friend her worries about the fact that someone was in love with her. Of course, Aemond would like to know as much as possible, but Miss kept the secret from him. Ebel lied that she needed a love potion just in case, otherwise she had become too popular. In fact, Dragon himself was worried about this topic, but he had not confessed anything to the girl before. Only now Aemond could not help the lady with magic, as he had done before. But he could lift Ebel's spirits by preparing an extremely tasty drink for her. The guy constantly tried to do everything to ensure that the heroine would not be sad about anything in life. And the girl was pleased to watch Aemond's beautiful back, which always supported her. Only after some time did Dragon admit that he had left for a while to tidy up the house. He couldn't tell anyone that he was a king, so he explained everything in a rather veiled manner. During the ruler's absence, some dragons dared to behave too noisily, and Amon could not forgive them, since he had given clear orders that they should be hidden. This is how Dragon got rid of the dirt in the entire house, although his heart was heavy because of it. Of course, the heroine thought that the guy was simply personally cleaning out his huge estate. The girl was impressed by the scale her friend described, although she was not a materialistic person. The heroine was still desperately eager to find out at least some information about her harmful ally. And this time, Aemond was ready to make contact, provided that the lady answered his question. The girl was interested in such a deal, which could well be beneficial for both of them. More than anything in the world, Dragon was interested in knowing what kind of letters Miss had burned back then. But Ebel wasn't ready to admit to her friend that her ex-fiancé was still stalking her. The guy immediately noticed that the heroine did not answer him, instead abruptly changing the subject. The girl jumped up from her seat in excitement, just so that her friend wouldn't have time to figure out anything. This time, Aemond let the situation slide, although he really wanted to know the truth about the letters. But Ebel's moral composure was much more important to the guy, so he remained silent. Due to a shortage of hands, the heroine quickly dragged Aemond into the cooking, who did not have time to escape from her. In fact, the guy wasn't even against it, since he was interested in everything related to people. So he cautiously inquired what kind of person the current heir to the throne was. Ebel had already met that guy several times, so she had already formed an impression of him. Despite the terrible scar, the lady saw in him only the handsome and kind prince of the empire. Dragon didn't like the fact that the girl spoke well of his potential competitor. Moreover, Ebel became lost in her dreams and compared Bane to the cake they had prepared together for their tea party. For the first time in his life, the Dragon King heard someone compare people to delicious food. However, the aristocrats were unable to appreciate the dessert, which this time looked suspicious. The burnt crust of the cake suggested that the lady had clearly done something wrong while preparing it. But in reality, all of this was part of the heroine's larger plan, so she was confident in herself. The girl insisted that everyone try at least a piece of this new recipe. To everyone's surprise, the first to dare to do this was the emperor, who was very fond of sweets. The delicate filling, combined with a firm crust, instantly won the heart of the empire's ruler. So soon, every person in the room admitted that Travis had talent from birth. The emperor could not be more pleased that he had finally found an excellent chef in the empire. Moreover, this girl caught the eye of his son, so she could become empress in the future. Although Ebel was not the most beautiful, her personal qualities more than complemented everything else. That is why the girl was firmly lodged in the head of the Dragon King, who often thought about her. Every time the guy ate sweets from the lady, he invariably smiled at his thoughts. Meanwhile, an incredibly large-scale ball was organized in honor of the prince's coronation. It was on this day that the heroine planned to return the necklace given to her to the heir. But at the most inopportune moment, the girl tripped, causing the gift to fly out of her hands. The fact that the necklace touched the ground and jingled quickly killed all the lady's hopes for luck. Ebel couldn't imagine a worse option, because she didn't want to be near the prince. But now she could not return to the heir the jewel that was in such a terrible condition. The girl did not have enough money to buy another similar necklace. At that very moment, the same stranger in the mysterious mask came to the girl's rescue. The guy noticed that Travis was very worried, so he immediately appeared next to her. But at first, the mist decided that this man wanted to dance with her again, for which there was no time. Now the only thing that worried Miss was that the necklace from the heir was smashed to pieces after the fall. Ebel was complaining just like that, but it turned out that her concerns reached the right person. It was all because this stranger had magic in his blood, so he handled it easily. This is how, in just a couple of seconds, the guy restored the expensive necklace to its original appearance. The girl's happiness knew no bounds, because now she could achieve justice for herself. Ebel needed to return the gift to the prince so that he would no longer lay claim to her. But the heroine remembered that at this meeting, the unknown man promised to tell her his mysterious name. It was just at that moment that the prince noticed the girl he had long wanted to talk to. So Bane approached the lady who, in his eyes, had been all alone all this time. In fact, the heroine would have preferred to avoid communication with Bane, as she was not ready for it. But before the girl could even blink, the mysterious stranger quickly disappeared somewhere. This is how Ebel found herself in a situation where she had to explain the return of the necklace. The girl stated that besides her, the prince must have many other beautiful candidates. It just turned out that all the other ladies were inevitably frightened by the face of the heir to the throne. That's why Bane became so attached to Ebel that she didn't show an ounce of fear in front of him. Gossip about the prince's bad character frightened people so much that they did not want to communicate. More than anything, the boy was afraid that Travis would join those who would be afraid of him. However, the girl could not lie to the prince, saying that from now on she hated him for his past. The silence between them dragged on, and with each passing second, the heir became more and more anxious. But his face brightened when Ebel admitted that she wasn't afraid after all. This is exactly the kind of wife the guy had been looking for all this time, and that is why he could not forget this girl. Due to the enormous amount of stress, the heroine eventually fell ill with a serious illness. She felt so bad that she couldn't even move a single finger. In her sleep, the girl constantly saw a familiar figure who was taking care of her. But the lady was in such a state that she was unable to recognize the face of the man in front of her. Only after a few days did Ebel gradually begin to come to her senses, as the fever passed. The girl immediately noticed that her handsome ally had been keeping watch near her bed the whole time. Travis felt good knowing that the guy cared so much about her at any given moment. No matter how much the heroine resisted, she gradually opened her heart more and more to her friend. The reason for this was not only his incredible beauty, which was striking even in dreams. The main thing was that Amund not only remained handsome, but also helped her well. Of course, the guy opened his eyes at the most inopportune moment, so he heard all the compliments. Taken by surprise, the heroine threw a pillow at him, as she expected her friend to be asleep. But Dragon didn't even think of being offended, as he was completely struck down by fits of genuine laughter. Never before had the king managed to become so close to anyone that he wanted to continue communicating with them. But the guy couldn't forget that just recently, the girl had a very high temperature. He handled her very carefully, making the lady feel like a little and sweet girl. It was obvious that of the two of them, Ebel would never have chosen the prince. It just turned out that Amund once again needed to leave the lady for a long time. This circumstance immediately set Travis back, and she no longer thought about the relationship. Every time the lady started hoping for a guy, he somehow disappeared from her life. The same thing happened with Amund, who did not warn anyone else about his imminent departure. Therefore, the heroine had to personally deal with disappointed customers because of this. Quite quickly, their entire collaboration seemed like just a sweet dream to the girl. Although Amund promised to write, Miss was still tired of his constant disappearances from her life. Therefore, she did not really expect letters from her friend, although she had already begun to miss him for a long time. The girl's sad state was quickly transmitted to Belle, who returned from her trip. The lady was so deep in thought that she began to devour her own goods without stopping. But these cookies still had to be sold to happy customers throughout the day. But the heroine was definitely able to convince that the new invention turned out to be excellent. Ebel was sad that she could not share the new sweet with Almond again. She was browsing through the merchandise until late at night, and therefore did not notice the uninvited guests in the store. The heroine rarely finished early, because now the demand for her food was growing. But today, she was unlucky, because the kidnappers were targeting the girl herself, and not the money. Usually, all of Ebel's robberies ended with temporary financial losses, along with the thief. However, the situation was completely different now, as Travis realized at the first glance at the enemies. The girl's first-class reaction was not long in coming, as she quickly ran away. Amon's gift never squeaked, as the lady herself had recently wrapped it tightly. Therefore, Ebel now had to save himself from unpleasant enemies. The guys were confident that they would easily catch the lady, who looked gentle and fragile. But in her past life, Travis had attended self-defense classes more than once. This is why the girl was able to easily repel the first wave of attacks from the robbers. Ebel was delighted with how skillfully she managed to handle the objects at hand. None of the men expected that the girl would be able to put up a fierce resistance when captured. This is all because Miss had developed good arm strength from constantly cooking with stretchy dough. But even for such a strong girl, 5 adults were too many. Therefore, the lady soon made an attempt to escape, just to somehow save herself. But if Ebel had a lot of strength, then she did not develop any speed during this time. So it was not at all surprising that the opponents were eventually able to catch the obstinate girl. Only after some time did the heroine come to her senses, discovering that she was in some kind of gloomy cave. The girl's head ached from the blow, as she had been knocked out rather roughly before the abduction. When Mrs. Vision returned, she realized that she had no idea what this place was. But what confused Ebel most was that a familiar silhouette was tied next to her. It was Geldry, who was kidnapped quite by accident, along with the owner of the candy store. The whole thing was that Benyu went to the girl at night to give her flowers, and he arrived at the exact moment when the robbers were just carrying the heroine out of the store. Of course, the guy couldn't ignore the fact that his beloved was kidnapped so rudely. Like a real ninja from the movies, she pounced on the boys, but didn't count their numbers. So Geldry quickly suffered the same fate as Ebel, no matter how much he wanted to help her. The guy woke up before the girl and felt ashamed that he had disgraced himself in front of her. But finally, Benyu had the opportunity to have a heart-to-heart talk with the lady who hadn't been listening to him. Even now, the heroine continued to turn away, not wanting to hear the guy's words, but his thoughts about how they were in love inevitably penetrated Travis's heart. And this predictably caused anger in the girl, who in the past had suffered so much because of the aristocrat. The lady could no longer believe the beautiful eyes of the Marquise, who often ran after other girls. But while they were arguing, bandits appeared, so the boy and girl had to keep quiet. The kidnappers behaved arrogantly, as they were sure that no one would help their victims. It was not difficult to guess that Ebel and Geldry would now be sold on the secret market. The bandits were only glad that they had captured not only a girl without relatives. One of them even became interested in which of the guys would be offered the largest sum of money. Although Ebel was a famous confectioner, Geldry looked so handsome that his beauty could be painted. Therefore, the bandits did not know exactly which of the two would be more profitable financially. Suddenly, Benyu could not stand it any longer and began to demand that the robbers at least let the girl go. The guy was ready to sacrifice himself, just so that no one would lay a finger on Travis. As soon as he used his charm, the robbers immediately bought the Marquise's face. They were not averse to personally assessing the excellent condition of his body, which they were going to sell. All the while, Geldry was being bullied. He continued to shout about his love for the lady, but the girl herself took advantage of the situation to attack one of the kidnappers. But it ended badly for her, as Ebel was at a huge disadvantage. Following Travis, Benyu also started a rebellion, but his attempts to escape were also quickly pacified. Everything was darkening before the heroine's eyes, and she dreamed that Geldry had been this good before. Gradually, the girl's consciousness floated away somewhere deep, no matter how hard she tried to come to her senses. Suddenly, a loud roar that echoed throughout the area finally brought the lady to her senses. Immediately after this, the bandits felt a shaking sensation with their entire bodies that went through the entire dungeon. Ebel had heard of dragons before, but she would never have thought that they really existed. Meanwhile, a huge clawed paw slowly appeared on the roof of the cave. Following her, the dragon himself appeared before the people, and his size could frighten anyone. The bandits were mere ants compared to this giant who sat before them. What outraged the lady most was that the thieves instantly forgot about their expensive goods. The girl had to watch as the guys ran away from the cursed cave as fast as they could. She couldn't untie herself, and as luck would have it, even Geldry didn't regain consciousness. Suddenly, the ropes were tenderly untied by the dragon, who did not want to harm the girl. But the aristocrat was even more surprised by the fact that this creature affectionately called her by name. The lady would never in her life have mistaken the voice that seemed to be coming from inside her head. The huge and menacing dragon no longer frightened Miss, despite all its strength and size. All because she unexpectedly recognized him as Amond, no matter how incredible it may sound. At first, the lady was so surprised that she couldn't even put a couple of words together, but she wasn't afraid of anything anymore. A moment later, Dragon carefully picked up the girl and carried her away from the cave. On his back, Ebel fell into a peaceful and deep sleep, as she did not feel the cold at all. Only the next morning, the heroine opened her eyes, but did not believe everything that had happened to her. The girl peacefully rolled over onto her other side, convincing herself that dragons did not exist. Suddenly, Travis realized that all this time, she had not been in her favorite bedroom at all. This realization made the girl jump up in place, looking around the rich furnishings of the room. A cheerful assistant, who could infect anyone with a good mood, ran up to her almost immediately. But Ebel was so confused that she almost didn't adopt the girl's gentle smile. This did not upset the maid, who, even alone, could talk for hours about anything. Only now did Travis notice that the lady had feathers coming out of her elbows, to which she merely laughed. As a result, the heroine could think of nothing better to do than decide that she was still asleep. But after a couple of minutes, the lady was already walking along the huge corridor together with a cheerful maid. The circumstances hinted to the girl that in fact everything around her was quite real. What bothered her most was the huge echo that carried any sound for many kilometers around. That's why Miss didn't dare ask her assistant any questions until she suddenly saw her friend. Amond was busy in the morning, so he couldn't immediately visit the girl he brought to his palace. Out of curiosity, the heroine almost daringly confronted the guy who was the only one who could answer her questions. Only now did Dragon point to his family's coat of arms, which he had hidden from the girl for a long time. He still felt awkward, admitting that he was the real Dragon King. A little later, the lady learned that all of the guy's relatives were winged animals of one kind or another. Surprisingly, the heroine did not feel any fear inside, although everything was conducive to it. Instead, the girl asked the guy to show his true appearance again. Amond could not refuse Ebel, because more than anything in the world, he wanted to receive her acceptance. A light breeze ruffled the heroine's hair as the guy began to transform into an animal. His appearance as a dragon could amaze anyone, so majestic did the creature seem. The lady immediately felt incredibly small and fragile compared to her friend. But from his face, Miss saw how friendly Amond remained in this form. That is why the lady was not at all afraid of her friend. Although she had recently had no idea about the existence of dragons, the girl had such a high level of acceptance that she didn't worry about anything. Ebel's reaction once again confirmed to Amond that he had found a very special person for himself. Meanwhile, the prince was panicking and dealing with the news that a real dragon had been seen nearby. His assistants were ready to tear and throw, if only to resolve this issue as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, not all of them supported the peaceful option of dealing with powerful beings. Since the prince was such a young ruler, many did not even really listen to him. The aristocrats persisted in their line, demanding that the heir declare war on all dragons. But Bane was more inclined to negotiate, since wars were always difficult. The boy was worried that his people might suffer even more than in previous times. By this time, Amond had managed to return Ebel to her store as if nothing had happened. But the girl was given away by her thoughtfulness, which was noticeable to Belle even with the naked eye. The heroine did not tell the whole truth to her assistant, since Derek helped her anyway. Travis even managed to convince Geldry that he had actually imagined the adventure. But the thought that Amond was the king of dragons did not leave the lady's head. Today, she closed the store early because of this, but someone knocked on the door right after that. Like a true store owner, the lady herself opened the door for the late customer. But it turned out that the man behind the door was not a sweets buyer at all. He reported that the prince had come to pick up the girl to take her to lunch at a restaurant. In fact, the heir didn't just show up to the lady without warning her at all. He had made attempts to negotiate with the Dragon King in the past, but nothing had worked. More than anything, Bane feared that another protracted war with the dragons would begin. And then, Ebel may well be among those who accidentally suffer from the battles. That is why Rakim came up with the idea of proposing to Miss, so that she would be under the protection of his family. Now, the prince could only hope that the girl would not dare to refuse him. Ebel looked extremely surprised at the sight of the heir, who personally visited her in the evening. The guy smiled kindly at the girl, trying his best to create a pleasant atmosphere between them. He had chosen the best restaurant in the city in advance to please the young aristocrat. Travis was delighted with the food, although she felt uneasy about the expensive items on the menu. However, the lady could not resist the food, the quality of which was beyond words. This place was completely under the control of the imperial family, so it was always at its best. Ebel immediately began to suspect that her friend had chosen this particular restaurant for a reason. Bane tried to keep the conversation going, so he revealed a lot of personal things about himself. He admitted that he was interested in cooking, which is why he invited the lady to the palace. The result was that they were now sitting together on a date in an expensive restaurant in the city. While the guy was noticeably nervous, the girl behaved relaxed until one important moment. To her surprise, she found an engagement ring with an expensive diamond in the ice cream. Only now did the heroine realize that the prince had come up with this way of proposing to her. The heir heard that something similar was popular in other countries, so he did it. But he didn't think about the fact that the girl could easily have accidentally choked on the jewel. Ebel's words genuinely scared the guy who got too deep into romance during the proposal. He had absolutely no knowledge of first aid, so he would not have been able to help the aristocrat. Seeing the guy's deep emotions, Ebel quickly changed her anger to mercy. The girl didn't even think that as a result, Bane would be much more scared than she was. The sad thing was that getting married soon was not part of the heroine's plans. She wanted to work. Therefore, she could not agree, no matter what prospects it opened up for her. Ebel could not even imagine that in response, the heir would offer her a contractual relationship. The guy wanted to protect the girl so much that he didn't care about all the other nuances. That is why he was ready to consider even the most incredible option of communication with Ebel. The guy's persistence began to increasingly strain the heroine, but she tried not to show it to him. It was clear that Bane needed at least some kind of definite answer from the girl he liked. In the end, the prince was left with nothing, since the girl ran away from him without accepting a single proposal. The Marquise, who did not receive a drop of his former daughter-in-law's love, was tormented in the same way by Ebel. The assistants tried their best to console the gentleman, but what could they do when the whole problem was with another person? What angered the guy most was that the girl lied to him, saying that there had been no kidnapping with them. Suddenly, the maid suggested that the girl might have misunderstood the guy's sociability. Geldry couldn't even imagine that from the outside, he looked like he was cheating on Ebel with everyone. But the guy didn't have enough practice to understand exactly what his main mistakes were. Therefore, he decided to turn to his sister, who had always been distinguished by her intelligence and quick wit. Meanwhile, Travis's assistants watched as security around their store increased. A knight's patrol now passed by this place almost every hour, on the orders of the prince himself. And only the heroine guessed that Bane did this only because of rumors about the appearance of a dragon. The heir gave the lady the impression of a man who cared about his people. But now the heroine had plenty of her own problems, because a little guest had come to see her again. The lady did not expect that, from now on, the boy would be forbidden to come to her because of his mother's meanness. The kind nanny brought Garrick without permission, but it's not a fact that she will be able to do it next time. The lady immediately suspected that it was her ex-mother-in-law who was trying to put a spoke in her wheel. But young Grant reported that a young woman had recently come to their estate. This meant that Kelly, who had recently returned from training abroad, came into action. The last thing Ebel wanted in the world was to meet this nasty lady who had ruined her life in the past. Travis was powerless to protect herself from the influence of this terrible and insidious woman. She was incredibly grateful to Gallic for this information, which could even save the girl's business. So, as a parting gift, Ebel gave the boy a recipe for his favorite cookies, so that he wouldn't be too sad. Even though they would hardly see each other, the girl still thought about the brave boy with a smile. Unexpectedly, Belle admitted that she too would like to have such a sweet and obedient child. This made Ebel understand that her assistant had recently become pregnant by her husband, which she was very happy about. The maid herself was delighted that she would now have a complete family. Only another girl could have understood how important this addition was to the assistant. Meanwhile, Derek was supporting the young Dragon King with delicious coffee. Aemond remembered well that his assistant had previously had mixed feelings about this drink. But now the guy realized that the king was happy with him, so he began to offer. Raven was very sad that the imperial family had not even tried this thing. In fact, his words were a secret signal, and the king understood his assistant perfectly. He didn't show that he realized that more traitors had arrived to them. Aemond was already quite tired of the fact that people were always climbing into his beautiful castle. And this time, it was a fairly young guy who agreed to spy purely out of stupidity. The young man was frightened at the sight of Dragon, because he hoped that his presence would remain unnoticed. Aemond's sly smile did not bode well for the guy, no matter how he justified himself. So with a light wave of his hand, he cut the rope that held the young man's entire body. The king knew perfectly well that the boy would not die after the fall, but it would be a good lesson for him. Derek was pleased that the gentlemen still remembered all their secret signals perfectly. Dragon suspected that people were drawn to his castle because of the dragon's renowned wealth. Ideally, it would have been possible to spread the rumor that the dragons had all become impoverished, but this was impossible. The king was consoled by the thought that not all people were like this, because evil always made him happy. He looked forward to his next meeting with the lady who always amazed him. The prince also wanted to see the girl, but his chances of doing so were much greater. Travis was once again invited to the imperial palace, where she went almost as if it were her own home. As soon as she entered the room, a heavy and silent atmosphere immediately hung in it. Because of this, the heroine saw even more clearly the difference between the rather gloomy air and the radiant Aemond, who achieved many things with the help of little tricks. This time, Bane would like to restore all the ancient imperial recipes together. In the past, due to the ban on desserts, many chefs simply threw away all their knowledge. But now with Ebel, it was becoming possible to resort to restoring the delicacies again. The heroine was delighted with this idea, so she immediately moved on to serious action. Rakim watched from the side with pleasure as the girl worked so hard for the desserts. For all her efforts, the guy couldn't help but reward the lady, so he called the maid to him. It was she who brought a warm shawl that was embroidered with beautiful imperial patterns. The heroine was only worried that other girls would start to be jealous of her. But Bane didn't have a single favorite who loved him with all her heart, despite the scar. Besides, the prince was quite capable of protecting Ebel from any troubles from the outside. At this time, in the Dragon Castle, some dragons caused panic before an important meeting. Not all of them believed that Aemond would attend this event, since he was disappearing somewhere more and more often. But this time, Dragon arrived in time, because today, the fate of all humanity was being decided. His appearance made everyone present fall silent, if only to show politeness. The king immediately began the meeting with the question of what they should do with the people. The red dragons were against useless extermination, which would bring unnecessary casualties. But Aemond could not approve of humans as mortal slaves of their ancient lineage. Then the black dragon boldly proposed to exterminate all of humanity, because they had enough strength. His name was Heath Alucard, and it was his kind that had suffered the most at the hands of humans in the past. But in Aemond's head, memories of Ebel, who could have died, constantly flashed. Therefore, he could not approve of the Black Dragon's proposals, which only angered him even more. Dragon saw that the situation was quickly getting out of control, even though he was using his status. But previously, it was the Alucard family that ruled the dragons, so the guy was hot-tempered. Even his closest friends were unable to calm the young man down at that moment. Heth broke all the rules of the meeting by allowing himself to assume his true form. There was so much anger and hatred towards people burning inside the dragon that he could no longer tolerate it. Of course, Aemond could not allow such disobedience in the ranks of his followers, so he immediately rushed after the stupid Het, intending to bring him back at any cost. The elder dragons were much more experienced, so they understood that they should not argue with the king. But even they could not understand why Dragon began to resist starting a war with people. The pain of losing the dragon princess was still fresh, as everyone remembered her murder. That girl was a relative of Heth. That's why he couldn't cope with hatred. But the boy was too young and weak to defeat the king of all dragons in the world. The ruler's henchmen were convinced that the man would not allow anyone to contradict him. Aemond easily established order as soon as someone tried to go against his opinion. This is how the important meeting ended so frivolously, where they came to nothing. Meanwhile, the heroine's affairs were going much better, since she had almost gotten rid of the rumors. Rakim had been supporting her business for some time now, so people were afraid to slander her further. Therefore, happy and calm days of prosperity and carefreeness finally arrived for the girl. But the happiness did not last long, because suddenly, Ebel was visited by that same sister of Geldry. The heroine immediately recognized her, although in this life, they had not yet had the chance to see each other. The lady hoped until the very end that this woman had only come to treat herself to her dessert. But it turned out that Kelly was furious that Travis had broken up with her brother so cruelly. But Ebel couldn't be scared by something like that after what she had been through. But Benyu didn't know about this yet, considering herself to be much smarter than this young aristocrat. The woman was going to spread rumors that it was her brother who had abandoned the candy store owner. As the lady had expected, Kelly's plans were, as always, distinguished by their treachery and cunning. Only this time, Miss had some evidence in store, as she had many letters from Geldry. The girl was already tired of wasting her evenings burning the young Marquise's graphomania. But the guy didn't stop there, as he kept walking in circles around the candy store. Kelly was only stopped from causing further scandal by the realization that she had few arguments. But Travis suspected that the key role here was played by the appearance of her red-haired assistant. Holt appeared right in front of the woman, causing her to immediately step back in panic. The assistant was worried that his mistress would be upset after meeting such a crazy client. But in her past life, the lady didn't feel so good, as she never defeated Kelly. Meanwhile, Aemond was still looking for any excuse to return to Ebel. However, the prince ordered that all city guards be strengthened, which made the king's life more difficult. Dragon understood perfectly well that all this happened because of his recent transformation into a dragon. But the guy didn't regret anything, because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to save the girl from danger. Even now, the king's thoughts were occupied with Ebel, so he thought of a small gift for her. So soon the assistant had to take the box to the girl, in which the secret lay. He told the lady several times that this box should only be opened in private. The guy couldn't say anything more, because then this gift would no longer be a surprise. But the heroine couldn't allow herself to let her friend go without thanking her for the box. So she gave him some delicious sweets to take with her, so that the guy wouldn't be sad. That same evening, the lady spent a long time puzzled over what exactly was in her gift. Ebel couldn't even imagine what exactly the Dragon King would put in the box for her. It turned out that he gave the girl a beautiful mirror that looked very expensive. Travis was delighted with the gift, which will definitely be useful to her in everyday life. But the mirror turned out to be magical. As it quickly complimented its owner, Ice broke into a smile and didn't even notice that the mirror knew about her reincarnation. Looking at the gift, the heroine suddenly became sad, as she remembered her friend. As soon as she said Aemon's name, rapid waves began to spread across the entire mirror. And then, it showed a picture of a dragon's castle, which greatly surprised the owner of the candy store. The girl remembered the guy's office well, although she had only been in the castle for a few days. Suddenly, Dragon appeared in the mirror, glowing with happiness and joy at the sight of the girl. Ebel couldn't believe that such magical technologies existed in this world. She was very embarrassed when she heard that the guy had been missing her very much all this time. In the girl's opinion, it would have been better if Amund had arrived in person rather than come up with such tricks. However, now Dragon had to fulfill his duties, so he could not leave. But the guy was able to appear in front of the mirror at any time to talk to his girlfriend. This is how, even at a distance, Ebel and Amund found opportunities to communicate with each other. They had no idea that at that moment Bane was suffering from loneliness and fear of dragons. The memories of how he got the scar were forever deeply ingrained in the heir's mind. He was afraid that if a full-scale war broke out, Ebel's store would have to close. But for now, the heroine had no idea about anything like that, so she enjoyed cooking. The girl worked together with her assistant from early morning to create a new and unique taste. Even from her first life, Ebel remembered well the recipe for an airy and sweet dessert, and as a result, she created a tiramisu that many pastry chefs would envy. The assistants were delighted with the skills of their mistress, who once again amazed their hearts. But today, the weather was so terrible that it was useless to wait for buyers. However, the lady noticed a lonely old woman on the street. who had clearly been wet in the rain for a long time. Grandma's gaze was so empty, as if she was looking for something she had lost many years ago. Ebel always trusted the local old ladies, because they were always her best customers, so Travis couldn't pass by the woman who had been drenched in the rain for a long time. It turned out that all this time, the old woman in the middle of the street was trying to find someone close to her, but visibility was so poor due to the rain that Miss suggested we wait at her place. So the lady brought the old woman into her shop, although she had no idea what to do with her. This grandmother couldn't even say her name, but she kept demanding more and more sweets. Before it was too late, Ebel sent Holt to the police, as the lady had clearly disappeared. But the old woman was not at all sad about losing all her loved ones in the rain. She demanded a huge amount of sweets, and somehow they all fit inside her. Only a few hours later, the neat girl came running for her lost mother, but the old woman immediately became hysterical because she wanted to see her beautiful daughter. But the whole point was that this lady was the daughter of such a crazy woman. Since her mother was diagnosed, Khadisha has been looking after her day and night. Ebel saw that the unknown aristocrat could not cope with her mother. Then the heroine resorted to trickery, because delicious sweets could console anyone. She sacrificed the very tiramisu she had been working on all morning for this task. But the result was even better, because the smile on the old woman's face knew no bounds. The grandmother instantly calmed down, because she was no longer worried about the people around her. For the first time in a long time, she smiled cheerfully, and even allowed herself to be led away calmly. In fact, Khadisha hadn't seen her mother in such a joyful state for a long time, so she even allocated too much money for the heroine, which the lady did not want to take. But the woman insisted that the candy store owner accept her gratitude. For Khadisha, her mother's peace of mind was many times more important than all this huge amount of money. And now the woman was incredibly grateful to Ebel for not leaving the old woman out in the rain. At this time, Kelly was preparing another trap for Travis, wanting to take revenge on her for everything. For her plans, Madame ruthlessly used her brother, who was ready to do anything for his beloved. But the older sister did not allow Geldry to act thoughtlessly, so that he would not ruin anything. So the Marquise had no choice but to listen to his wise and experienced relative. Kelly hoped to arrange things so that her brother would personally be disappointed in stupid Abel, and for this purpose the woman came up with the idea of using the nearest imperial banquet. She knew better than anyone how quickly rumors could spread during such events. The day soon arrived when Kelly planned a real disaster for Ebel. Geldry was one of the first to arrive at the event. As he was eager to see his beloved, he happily told everyone around him that Travis actually regretted breaking up the wedding. That's why the guy hoped to get back the girl today, who also had feelings for him. But the guy had no idea that he had simply fallen for the bait of his cunning and treacherous sister. Kelly didn't care which person she used, as long as she achieved her goals. As soon as Ebel appeared at the ball, she could not calm her wild nerves. The girl suspected in advance that the Benyu family would spread bad rumors about her. This made Travis less and less willing to attend an event where only her enemies would be present. Quite quickly, the heroine noticed that the rumors around her were gradually becoming more and more intensified. The aristocrats were no longer embarrassed to whisper about the girl who broke off her engagement to Benya. It wasn't hard for Ebel to guess that Kelly was actively trying to get revenge on her. Belle was even more worried than the lady that their banquet had been ruined by gossip. But the heroine didn't have time to come up with any plan, as the joyful Marquise came running to her again. The girl was already tired of repeating to him that everything between them had long since ended irrevocably. But the guy believed his sister, who lied that Travis still had feelings. Kelly openly laughed at her brother, who was causing more and more trouble for her rival. She planned to use Geldry to further humiliate Ebel at the ball. Therefore, before the heroine could even blink, she found herself in the very center of unpleasant events. But then, a noble aristocrat who was close to the emperor came to the girl's aid. The lady did not immediately remember that she had seen this lady when she picked up her sick mother, but the other guests immediately recognized Khadisha Irene, who belonged to a noble family. Even Ebel knew that Irene's family had remained a support for the ruler for many years. They occupied important positions, but tried not to reveal their identities to everyone. So Travis had no idea that she had helped such a famous woman that evening, and Khadisha reciprocated the lady's feelings, since she defended her honor before all people. The heroine couldn't have come up with a better revenge, since no one would listen to Kelly anymore. Now, Sister Benyu's only hope was to attract the emperor's attention. The woman was confident that Bane would not be able to resist her beauty and charm. Only stupid Geldry could have ruined everything by deciding to start a showdown with his sister right here. The guy was deeply offended because his relative had rudely lied to him. Once again, Kelly shifted all the blame onto Ebel, claiming that she had simply deceived her too. But the Marquise was no longer inclined to believe the words of his sister, who had not lived up to his expectations. So suddenly, Kelly was left without the support of her brother, who always helped her. The woman could not bear such humiliation, so she urgently needed an heir. But she didn't expect that Bane would also fall under the influence of the modest shop owner. The prince looked at the girl with such love that it was clear that he would take her side. So Kelly lost on all fronts, although she expected to emerge victorious today. But Abel was expecting a pleasant conversation with Rakim, who amazed everyone with his vast knowledge. The guy remembered quite a lot about his possessions, because he tried to protect them. That's why Bane was ready to answer any question the girl had about the Imperial Palace. But the lady turned out to be unpredictable, because she wanted to know how many rooms there were in the palace. This is precisely the kind of information that the prince, who boasted of his extensive knowledge, did not possess. In fact, the heroine did not plan to get closer to Bane, but she could not leave him. Instead, Abel kept her eyes peeled for the mysterious masked stranger, and soon he really did appear in front of the girl, even though she was walking with the prince. The stranger deliberately stood at a distance from the heir, because they were in fact enemies. Although Bane did not recognize the man, he immediately grabbed his weapon with apprehension. But Armand, and it was he, was not taken aback by such a tense greeting. He did not miss the opportunity to laugh at the prince, who was much more frightened than the girl. But Dragon had chosen the situation incorrectly, because the lady could not leave an heir. Therefore, to avoid a fight between the two acquaintances, this time mischose Bane. The Dragon King could not reveal himself, no matter how much he wanted to for the girl's sake. But his hint that one guy was waiting for a lady completely revealed the personality to Ebel. Only now did Travis realize that this unknown person had always reminded her of Amond. But Dragon could no longer stay for the conversation, for he was afraid of provoking the prince. With the help of magic, he disappeared into thin air as easily as if he had never been there. But the heroine's adventures did not end there, because Geldry found her again. Moreover, this time, the Marquise crossed all acceptable boundaries with his desire to talk. Benyu was unlucky, because next to the girl, there was a prince who would not tolerate such treatment. Bane's face burned with rage, because the aristocrat was so furiously pestering poor Ebel. Only thanks to the prince was the heroine able to get rid of the guy who had become annoying to her. However, Geldry could not remain silent, because he sincerely loved the girl who almost became his wife. His words were the last straw for Travis, who didn't believe a single word the guy said. She remembered very well how in his past life, Benyu had run after many girls around. Their relationship was so close that they were just a little short of kissing. So Ebel was tired of the fact that she was constantly suffering from pain in her relationship with the Marquise. At that time, the girl still believed in happiness from love, but she found herself completely trampled by her beloved. The worst part was that Geldry had no idea what exactly Travis was shouting at him about. All these events happened to the previous lady, so only she remembered them. In this reality, there was no such thing as the death of the unknown Ebel Travis. But the girl realized too late that she had said too much to the poor Marquise Benya. The worst part was that the lady eventually lost consciousness, and the prince's face was the last thing she saw. The girl came to only a few hours later, but she was not at home at all. The heroine's last memories immediately flashed in her head, causing her to become truly horrified. But what bothered Ebel most was that the prince had been anxiously standing near her bed the whole time. Out of shame and disgrace, the girl hid under the blanket. But even this gesture could not save her. In fact, Bane had no intention of scolding the lady for losing her temper recently. The guy was always an understanding person, so he supported everyone in difficult times. So Ebel was finally able to confess to him that she had planned to become the Marquise's wife. But now this was long in the past, because the lady had completely different plans. The prince was bothered by the fact that Geldry looked as if he was telling him the truth about not cheating. But at the same time, it didn't seem to him that Ebel was lying, although their stories were radically different from each other. However, the guy didn't ask the girl, who was already stressed, anything. He promised to bring something warm before the lady returned to her home. Only now did Ebel realize that she couldn't have made it to the bed because she was unconscious. It turned out that the prince personally carried her to the room, and many could see them from the outside. This circumstance deeply embarrassed the heroine, who would not have wanted such gossip. The lady's embarrassed cry reached the guy even when he went out into the corridor and closed the doors. Bane felt like he had become much closer to Ebel, but she was clearly hiding something from him. The prince did not dare ask the girl anything, just so as not to frighten her even more. As soon as Travis returned to the store, she immediately began making sweets. But it so happened that Miss had to eat them all alone due to the lack of customers. On the weekend, everyone preferred to walk alone, and Ebel even envied the couples a little. But even on such a day, Geldry stopped at nothing, still trying to make peace with the lady. The heroine was so tired of arguing with her boyfriend that she began to hide from him at such moments. If you think about it, among the lady's husband candidates, there was Bane, who seemed better than the Marquise. But the guy needed a wife, and Travis wasn't planning on getting married yet. So now the Dragon King seemed even more promising due to the freedom he had been given. In the end, the lady came up with something that deeply shocked even her faithful servant. It's all because the miss made a contractual relationship in order to temporarily contact the prince. But the heroine didn't expect that Belle would conclude from this letter that the lady had no feelings. The maid understood perfectly well that it was easier to remember long recipes for sweets than this. No matter how good a man the lady considered Bane, she truly did not love him. But Ebel did not dare to take the first step towards Almond on her own. The assistant saw the lady's embarrassment, so she advised her to go on a date first. The girl described their mutual feelings as an incredible combination of banana and sweet chocolate. Individually, these ingredients were not nearly as tasty as when combined. This is how, by chance, a maid invented another sweet that quickly became popular. So the heroine was instantly inspired by the idea of preparing something similar right now. The maid always enjoyed watching how quickly Ebel became inspired by thoughts of food. Along the way, Travis became convinced once again that Kelly was continuing to spread rumors about her. But as soon as the girl treats people with sweets, they immediately take her side. So the only difficulty for Miss was how to continue to support her store. As soon as she thought about the store, the image of a handsome guy immediately came to mind. The girl tried her best not to get involved with her friend, who had abandoned her once again. But, as luck would have it, many aristocrats were talking about a dragon arriving at the imperial palace. Only Ebel understood what exactly was being discussed, and only she did not want a war with the dragons. But what could the opinion of one lady mean when all the people around were afraid of these creatures? The last thing the heroine wanted in the world was for her two loved ones to fight each other. The rumors were true, and Aemon did indeed arrive to meet with the heir to the throne. Bane could barely contain his anger at the sight of the creature that had once seriously harmed him. But Dragon behaved quite peacefully, although he felt the hatred surrounding him. Even with all his efforts, Reckham still considered the dragon a real monster, and Amon could no longer tolerate this insult because it applied to his entire family. The assistants watched in horror as the boys prepared to tear each other to pieces. But everything changed dramatically as soon as the young maid brought the desserts at such an inopportune time. The servants were horrified that some girl had completely forgotten about etiquette and manners. But Bane quickly guessed that it was Ebel who sent the dessert to the imperial palace. Aemond recognized the sweetness by its smell, so he also immediately understood whose hands had baked this delicacy. So, to the surprise of the assistants, the guys demanded that they be given this wonderful food. And so, unexpectedly, the heroine's dessert led to the possibility of a truce between people and dragons. From the moment Bane met Ebel, he never missed an opportunity to eat her food. And Amon now completely shared his rival's feelings, as he enjoyed it no less than he did. Who would have thought that it would be so easy to reconcile two such different people? After this tasty snack, Rakim was much more inclined to negotiate a peace treaty. It turned out that Dragon had prepared all the conditions for the truce in advance and written them down on paper. But the Dragon King's sly smile continued to frighten Bane, who did not trust his opponent. The guy needed a reason why Aemon decided to come to a truce with the people. And Dragon honestly admitted that it was his love for the person that influenced his decision. The aristocrats couldn't believe their ears at first, as dragons usually didn't like people. Even the prince was surprised, although he should have been best prepared for such turns of events. Aemond cunningly did not tell her his name or Ebel's, although he truly loved her. But the prince, as expected, laughed loudly, since he did not consider such a union possible. Unlike him, Dragon remained calm, since the guy was unable to hurt him in any way. Before concluding a peace treaty, Bane was forced to voice 3 conditions. First of all, the guy needed the dragons to not show their appearance and not harm anyone. And finally, he demanded that Aemon deal with the lovesick dragon as soon as possible. The king's peaceful appearance apparently deceived the prince, because in reality, he could easily lose his temper. A shiver of terror ran down Rakim's spine as he realized he was just 1 step away from death. A terrible past flashed through the boy's mind when one dragon left him this scar. Then the heir desperately defended his possessions from the creature that suddenly attacked them. This dragon was so huge and strong that it was impossible to defeat it. But Bane had nowhere to retreat, because behind him were badly wounded knights. So it was at that moment that he received this terrible scar that will stay with him for the rest of his life. Aemon knew this story well, and with its help, he suppressed all the spirit of the heir. It may have been cruel, but otherwise the boy would have continued his useless resistance. But now Bane suddenly became quiet, because he realized how wrong he was in this situation. To smooth things over, Aemon recalled that he actually respected the heir to the throne. But even the most foolish aristocrats did not believe the dragon's speech because of prejudice. Only for the sake of evil, whom the dessert reminded them of, were the guys ready to conclude a temporary truce. At that moment, the caring husband sent Belle for a walk, and the heroine went with her. Travis was genuinely happy for her friend, who seemed so happily married. The girl herself wasn't particularly sad, because she still had a favorite job that brought her joy. But both Ebel and Belle were interested in what kind of child their former assistant would give birth to. That is why the lady tried to accompany the maid all the way home, so that everything would be all right with her. Although Miss didn't want it, she couldn't help but think about whether a person could have children from a dragon. Surprisingly, as soon as Ebel remembered her friend, he immediately appeared in her store. At first, the heroine thought she was just imagining things, because the guy didn't even have keys. So Travis couldn't imagine any way in which Aemon would get into the store. But it turned out that the girl had not imagined her beloved and charming ally at all. The boy missed Ebel so much that he ran to her immediately after meeting the prince. Quite quickly, the girl realized that her friend was indeed not a figment of her imagination. Aemon acted in Travis's shop as if it belonged to him from the very beginning. But the heroine didn't pay attention to this, because she was interested in the result of the meeting with the prince. Ebel would not tolerate it if the Dragon King began to evade a serious answer again. Then the guy admitted that he was ready to kill the prince, just to keep the girl close by. But the lady didn't understand why she should have been pleased by such terrible news. However, the guy pressed himself against Ebel, as he really needed her support at that moment. Aemon missed the girl so much that he didn't care about anyone else. But Travis couldn't forgive her friend for leaving her alone for so long every time. The lady's vivid emotions told Dragon that she had been missing him greatly all this time. This time, the heroine managed to resist the dragon's beautiful gaze, which attracted attention. But the guy didn't want to tell anything unless he had a delicious lady dessert in front of him. Aemon really wanted to get the girl's attention with all his might, so he was deliberately being mean. Ebel had no choice but to offer his friend one of the best desserts. But even then the dragon did not calm down, because he wanted the miss to personally feed him with a spoon. The heroine could not refuse this request, because she was terribly interested in the details of the meeting. So Travis obediently began to feed the guy, who promised to tell her everything. The lady was eager to know everything about how things were currently going between dragons and humans, and it turned out that neither the prince nor the king wanted the girl's shop to close because of the war. Miss had no idea that she had accidentally become the reason for the enemies to make peace, but she still had to feed the cunning dragon if she wanted to hear the rest of the story. Only now did she learn that people had been illegally trying to enter the dragon castle all this time. Even the lady could see how many problems this greedy attitude of the people caused. It was for this reason that Aemon did not believe that trade with humans was possible. This is all because the dragons remembered well how their war with people began. As expected, the heroine knew nothing about the tragedy that happened sometime in the past. But now the miss was unable to hear this story, since the guy had cunningly finished her dessert. The Dragon King was ready to continue communicating with the lady, even despite the lack of sweets. The compliments from her friend increasingly embarrassed the girl, who was not ready for this. This time, Dragon didn't hide his feelings for Ebel, as he was tired of holding himself back. And for the first time, the heroine realized that she could talk endlessly with this handsome guy. Only now did she realize that love was much more beautiful than the girl had imagined. Travis had always run from feelings before, but who could refuse such a beautiful dragon? The guy considered every little thing ideal in the lady, and honestly told her about it at such a moment. There could not have been a better time to declare his love, so Aemon did not hesitate, and Ebel answered him with consent, since she was completely immersed in romantic feelings. All this time, the lady tried to come up with a contractual relationship, but it was no longer needed. From now on, Miss had once and for all decided what kind of partner she wanted to see by her side. At that moment, everything became unimportant for the girl, whose feelings turned out to be mutual. Now that the Dragon King was sure that he was loved, nothing was impossible for him. It seemed that the happiness of the dragon and the man knew no bounds, despite the difference in their species. That's how quickly the heroine forgot about all her plans, because even business no longer worried her. From that moment on, Aemon moved completely into his beloved store to help her. Belle was delighted with the new pairing, although she had no idea about Dragon's identity. But the maid was satisfied with the fact that her mistress had finally allowed herself to experience feelings. With her compliments, the assistant earned the trust of the king, who did not like all people. But Belle still didn't understand why the guy separated people into a separate category. However, she didn't have time for these thoughts, because the store opening was soon to take place. As usual, Ebel couldn't even take a break due to the incredible popularity of her store. But the girl was only happy about the huge influx of customers who liked her sweets. In the meantime, the lady again heard questions about why the war with the dragons began. The girl still hasn't found an answer to the question of what tragedy happened in the distant past. In the Imperial Palace, the fact that Aemon had agreed to a truce was also actively discussed. No matter how much the prince wanted to exterminate the dragons, the lives of people were his priority. So Bane steadfastly endured criticism from assistants who were unhappy with this decision. All the aristocrats considered dragons to be truly evil because they remembered how terrible they were. So even the wisest people could not forgive these creatures that were stronger than them. So Rakim had to be reminded that it was he who made decisions regarding the empire. Only in this way did Duke Gerard finally remain silent, although he was against peace with the terrible creatures. The man realized that if he wanted to do things his way, he would have to act secretly. Naturally, the Duke complained to the Emperor about the decisions of his young and willful son. Gerard hoped to find salvation in the person of the ruler, who had lost his leg in the war. So soon, Bane found himself summoned to his father, which is why he didn't expect anything good at the end of the conversation. The ruler immediately guessed that his son was avoiding war only out of fear of Ebel's possible death. However, the man was not as strict as it might seem at first glance. He always understood his son well, who tried his best to help his beloved father. As a child, the boy promised that he would definitely exterminate all the dragons to avenge his family. But now Bane had other priorities, so he couldn't afford war. Surprisingly, the ruler allowed Ebel to become empress if she could pass the training. The prince could not believe that his father took his side and did not ignore his son's feelings. But the heroine wasn't thrilled that she had to learn palace etiquette. Never before had the girl encountered so many rules and norms of behavior. Bane had no other choice, as this was the only way to maintain peace with the dragons. The girl could not admit to the prince that she was already in love with a real dragon. And not just any ordinary one, but the king himself, who often came to visit her. Therefore, the lady could never confess to the prince who her lover really was. The last thing a girl would want in the world is to have such problems because of her love for a guy. Ebel could not ignore the heir's request, because it directly concerned the world. Bane would never have resorted to Travis's help if he had had the chance. But in the current situation, he urgently needed to convince his father to continue to support his decision. So the heroine made concessions and agreed to sign a contract, albeit for only a month. This was already enough for the guy, who was afraid of being refused because of such a difficult request. But Bane didn't expect the girl to admit that she already had a loved one. Ebel had no intention of lying about her feelings, as she was no longer ashamed of love. Rakim could not resist and tried to find out if he happened to know this wonderful man. Although it was clear from the start that the guy had gone too far, as he was interfering in the girl's personal life. As a result, Ebel quickly changed the topic to signing the contract, which was much more pleasant for her than talking about her beloved. Until now, the lady could not believe that she was now saving the world by intending to study imperial etiquette. Despite her second reincarnation, the girl did not know her future, so she acted at random. At first, according to the contract, the guy and the girl will behave like a real couple in love. But after just a month, Bane was willing to quarrel so that the reason why they eventually broke up would be clear. This performance should be enough for the ruler to believe in the sincerity of his son. No matter how sad Rakim was, he had no right to pester a lady who was already in love. The guy could only hope that in 1 month, he would be able to attract the missus' attention. But Bane knew perfectly well how small his chances were of winning the love of the girl he liked. In his dreams, Abel was supposed to become his wife, but this conversation was destined to happen, all because the girl was in love with Amond, to whom she told about her contract with the prince. Of course, the guy wasn't thrilled that his girlfriend was already in contact with another guy. The Dragon King put in all his effort for this picnic, but ended up receiving such a cruel confession. No matter how Ebel ran away from her beloved, who would only play this role temporarily, he could not help but be jealous of her. Travis herself was well aware of how pathetic all her excuses sounded in this strange situation. More than anything, the girl was afraid that Amond would be very offended by her and stop talking to her for a while. But it turned out that the king had decided to deal with Bane, just so that his beloved would not suffer. But the lady didn't need that kind of help, so she pulled the guy towards her. Only now did the heroine realize that the cunning dragon had once again taken advantage of her emotions. This is all because the guy initially wanted to approach the lady, but did not dare to do it himself. But now that Ebel had personally drawn him to her, Amond had the right to do everything, and he happily kissed his beloved girl, enjoying the moments that they were together. With each kiss, Travis's blush grew brighter, but it seemed to bother Dragon. The guy only rejoiced even more when he saw that all his actions were pleasing to the girl. They gave themselves completely to each other's company, while such a peaceful opportunity existed. Only a couple of hours later, the heroine returned to the conversation about the war between dragons and people. But Dragon understood that it would not be so easy to accomplish this, since his subjects were evil. Only now did he decide to confess to his beloved how this confrontation had begun. The king still couldn't hide the fact that some of the dragons sincerely hated people, but he didn't know that someone from the outside would help the prisoner Het get out of prison. The boy himself did not expect that any of the king's subjects would take his side. He spent a long time in prison after his crazy behavior at a public meeting. Het was fully prepared to take decisive action to make people pay for everything. But for this, Alucard expectedly needed allies, because alone he was weak. During his imprisonment, the black dragon became so weak that he could barely stand on his feet for several minutes. But his temporary assistant didn't even want to tell the black dragon his name. Het was surprised that the human representative was well acquainted with him. Together, they wanted to avenge the princess who was once a relative of Alucard. It all started at a time when dragons coexisted peacefully with people. At that time, the Dragon Kingdom was ruled by a black dragon, and he tried to please all the races. Nothing foreshadowed the disaster that was to affect many generations after. Dragons even taught people how to use fire, because they were kind to them. The only thing that was strictly forbidden was love between representatives of different races. But it so happened that the dragon princess fell in love with a handsome man of humble origin. This man constantly tried to please his beloved with delicious food, as their feelings were mutual. The girl loved pizza the most, and the guy made it the best in the world. The heroine was already surprised at this moment, since she did not expect such a branch of the story. She couldn't even imagine that it wouldn't just be desserts that would end up being banned in the Empire. But at that time, pizza was a popular food, so the lovers had no obstacles. Due to the delicious food, the dragon princess quickly gained weight, but this did not bother the guy much. At this moment, the heroine could not contain her emotions, because this moment seemed funny to her. But there was nothing funny about this, because many aristocrats turned away from the fat girl. Moreover, at that time, people began to create powerful weapons from rare dragon ore, and their most terrible invention was a spear that could pierce even the strong armor of a dragon. None of the dragons knew that the emperor was actually unhappy with their presence, and many aristocrats agreed with his opinion, not wanting to tolerate dragons near them. It was the princess's lover who was the first to bring the spear to the ruler at that moment. The man wanted to deal with the girl he had previously fed with food with his own hands. A terrible betrayal befell the princess, who sincerely loved an ordinary man. After all, in order to obtain the title, the commoner sacrificed everything just to forget about poverty. As a result, all the spears in the empire were aimed at the poor lady, who did not even want to resist. And that nasty man married the emperor's daughter, happily abandoning his previous girlfriend. Thus, an unjust death befell the most harmless dragon in the history of the entire empire. Of course, the princess's relatives could not forgive people for such terrible pain. The heroine had no idea that the real story was so sad and sorrowful. Only dragons remembered this truth, since they lived many times longer than humans due to their physical characteristics. Ebel came up with the idea to please Amand by telling him that she would never abandon him, so he could eat in peace. These words really amused the guy, although he was not at all worried about his weight. The dragon admitted that he always ate a lot, but did not gain weight due to his fast metabolism. However, he would be glad if Travis became a little plumper during their romantic relationship. But the girl had no plans to gain weight, as she liked her figure the way it was. While they were chatting pleasantly, the story was gaining momentum, turning in a bad direction. Het was abandoned by his savior, so he wandered the streets for a long time, dying of hunger and fatigue. And by chance, he passed out right in front of Kelly, who at first frowned. The girl didn't really like beggars, especially when they entered her own territory. But this guy seemed so handsome to Ben-Yu that she couldn't ignore him. When Het woke up, he couldn't immediately understand what kind of rich place he found himself in. He was lucky, and Kelly was just there to greet him when he woke up. The women brought some food with them to appease such a handsome beggar. She was always attracted to looks, so she couldn't take her eyes off the unknown guy. It was immediately clear that Alucard was even more beautiful than the popular Geldry, so Kelly quickly found herself enchanted, even though she didn't notice the nuance herself. But the food that Ben-Yu brought with her was too disgusting for Het. His character always left much to be desired, and in this he was very similar to Kelly. The guy had no idea that now he wouldn't be able to escape from this insidious woman so easily. The lady had already decided for herself that it would be nice to make the mysterious stranger a servant. The fact that the guy allegedly lost his memory was only to the advantage of the resourceful aristocrat. But the woman had no idea that Het was actually just waiting for the right moment to attack. He had a recurring nightmare of his poor relative screaming in agony from terrible pain. At that moment, all the dragons were far away, so no one could help the kind and sweet princess. Until now, the guilt for what happened tormented Alucard, although at that moment he was not yet born. The guy woke up almost every night because the dead lady would not give him any peace. And this time, he also heard loud voices behind the wall arguing with each other. Het was amazed when he accidentally heard the name Ebel in that conversation. Alucard knew perfectly well that this was the name of his king's beloved. So the circumstances turned out to be the best possible for the Black Dragon, who found himself an ally. So the next morning, he decided to get personally close to the woman who hated Travis. After a night of fighting with her brother, Kelly didn't look very well, as she had hardly slept. Alucard immediately admitted that he had accidentally overheard his relative's nighttime conversation. This made the woman tense, because she did not like to open her soul to anyone and complain about pain. What surprised her most was the guy's lie, who said that he knew this girl well. Meanwhile, the heroine had no idea that another conflict was being prepared behind her back. The girl spent all her energy on her studies, which were extremely difficult for her. However, Ebel had no intention of giving up, because the future of almost the entire empire depended on it. She kept waiting for the right moment to tell Bane about the story with the princess. Learning etiquette took up all the lady's days, so she left the shop to assistants. But no matter how hard Miss tried, her mentor found fault with almost every step. Travis never thought that becoming one of the high nobility aristocrats could be so difficult. But what scared the heroine most was that she would have to learn many names of rulers at once. As a result, at the end of the first day, the girl felt squeezed out, like a mountain of lemons. Even the idea of saving the world did not please Ebel, who was exhausted almost to death. The lady barely made it to the carriage that was supposed to take her home at the end of her training. Quite by accident, the miss fell, but she was immediately caught by the prince's strong arms. The heroine didn't even notice his presence, since her attention was currently at 0. But Bane was there in time, caringly, even though he couldn't share the pain of his beloved girl. The guy couldn't let the lady go home empty-handed, as he wanted to at least feed her. But in the end, it was Ebel who shared with the prince the desserts she had managed to grab with her. It was at this moment that the girl plucked up the courage to have a serious talk with the heir. The only thing he didn't understand was why Travis had suddenly started talking about his love of pizza. It so happened that due to excitement, the lady began to talk all sorts of nonsense instead of serious topics, Only after this was the heroine able to tell the prince the story of the love between the princess and the human. She did not forget to mention how tragically this relationship between the races ended. Bane was left puzzled by this story, as he had never heard of such a confrontation. Before, it seemed to him that it was the dragons who, without reason, started a war with people in the past. Ebel had no evidence that this story had ever actually happened, but the girl would not want the senseless war between races to continue because of grievances. Most of all, Miss was afraid that the prince would not believe her words, since they would be unpleasant to him. But the guy had long remembered that Ebel was not the type to lie for profit. Therefore, he promised to conduct his own investigation in order to achieve justice in the future. These words made the girl happy, as they gave her hope for maintaining peace in the empire. She tried her best to make sure that her friends no longer had to fight each other, but the lady had no idea that her actions only hindered the insidious Duke Gerard. He increasingly hated Travis, who was constantly throwing spokes in his wheels at random. It was this aristocrat who was responsible for cultivating hatred in the Black Dragon, releasing him, and he was the one who ordered an urgent search for dragon ore throughout the empire once again. He had placed so much hope in Het, who was now chatting pleasantly with one of the aristocrats. The guy tried his best to seduce Kelly by talking about how terrible Abel was. He even lied about having once worked for Travis, and this was what most irritated the vengeful Kelly. The woman was uncomfortable with any mention of the store owner, whom she had not been able to win over. But now she saw before her a man who had suffered no less than she had. So Benyu was once again determined to do everything possible to ensure that Ebel was left with nothing. Het had his own reasons for hating Travis, who had changed the Dragon King beyond recognition. Aemond would never have agreed to a truce before if he had not met this girl. So more than anything in the world, Alucard wished for a terrible death for the lady who had interfered with his plans. That is why he was willing to cooperate with the man, just to achieve his goal. The consequences of their plan were soon discovered by Belle, who was unable to find any cooking ingredients. It turned out that none of the farms could supply milk due to sudden problems with the cows. Unlike her assistant, the heroine immediately understood who could be behind such a terrible deed. The lady had little choice, but right now she could not take revenge on her opponents at random. The first thing Ebel did was to personally go to the farms, which were in terrible condition. It really was as if the cows all got sick at once, and this affected even small production facilities. The girl had no idea what caused such a widespread disease among animals. She felt sorry for the cows, because misunderstood that she was indirectly to blame for this. The farmers had a lot of experience in treatment, but even they could not do anything. However, the heroine had no intention of sitting still, and it wasn't just about her candy store. The first thing she did was turn to Aemond, who was skilled in various kinds of magic, for help. But this was the first time the guy had encountered the need to cure poor animals. Derek was the most outraged by this, because he remembered that his master was the Dragon King. Unlike his assistant, Dragon saw nothing wrong with helping his beloved lady. Plus, it was a great opportunity for the guy to ask for a little praise for himself. Aemond gave Ebel a clear hint as to what kind of payment he would require for his help. For the sake of saving animals, Miss was ready to kiss her beloved. If only it would help. That's how easily and quickly she got a restoration potion that saved her from any illness. The girl did not hesitate, although she partly wanted to keep it for herself for the future. However, the cows were much more important now, because the lady could not allow them to suffer any longer. As a result, the heroine's days only became even harder, because the training did not stop for a second. Each time the prince saw the girl off, he saw how difficult etiquette was for her. Bane never missed an opportunity to talk to the lady in the hope that she would pay attention to him. The heir did not fully understand Ebel's difficult situation, since he had been studying etiquette since childhood. But today, the heroine was moved not even by this reason, so tears came to her eyes. At the sight of the delicious cookies, Miss realized that the day might come when she would no longer be able to bake them. The girl was angered by the fact that the heir had not thought about his surrounding farms all this time. Meanwhile, making cookies for her was becoming increasingly difficult due to animal problems. This is what made Ebel burst into tears, because she couldn't find a way out of her dire situation. Bane felt ashamed that he hadn't really cared about imperial territory all this time. All this led to the prince personally taking charge of animal farms. By this point, the heroine had already collected her emotions, so she was ashamed of her behavior. But Bane was grateful to the girl for opening his eyes to the careless way of running a household. The lady's happiness knew no bounds when Reckham promised to sort out all the problems on the farms. With the help of Amon's magic potions, the heroine quickly got all the sick animals back on their feet, and the prince assigned people to find the cause of the cows' health problems. As a result, a stone was discovered in the feeders, which was causing such huge problems for the animals. Since the lady herself did not know what this object was, she turned to Dragon for advice, and he immediately guessed that the girl was holding a piece of dangerous dragon ore in her hands. The guy couldn't believe that this particular material was found among the cows. But before that moment, several more days passed, during which the cows got better. But Ebel's troubles didn't end there, because she never found the culprits. So one day, Belle, with tears in her eyes, discovered that the birds had also begun to suffer. Moreover, Holt learned that previously cured cows had succumbed to the disease again. All these problems made the heroine's head spin unbearably because she didn't know what to do. It seemed that just as Miss was resolving issues with one situation, another one was immediately thrust upon her. And even the help from the prince could not help the girl save the animals at that moment. Bane conducted further investigation into the princess, but found no mention of that tragedy. All he knew was that at some point, weapons production actually did accelerate. That is why the heir called the lady to discuss these issues. Despite her fatigue after training, everything changed dramatically when Amond was able to recognize the dangerous dragon ore in the stone. The worst thing was that this material could only be obtained with the help of dragons. From the description, the lady immediately understood how dangerous this material was for animals. All this time, she thought that it was the Benyus who were to blame for all the diseases on the farms. But the lady had no explanation as to how this family knew about the dragon ore. But Amond immediately guessed that without the help of the dragon, no one would have obtained the material. At that very moment, one of the king's followers appeared majestically in the air. Whoever this dragon was, Dragon could easily protect the girl from his attack. So the guy's body didn't even tense up with fear, even though he pressed Ebel closer to him. But it turned out that it was the red dragon who had come to the master, and he had good intentions. This woman's name was Lesha Sorbian, and it was not without reason that she urgently flew to the king. Even despite Amon's grumbling, the lady could no longer remain in the castle. As soon as Dragon heard that Het had escaped, his expression instantly changed. Never before had the guy allowed himself to get angry when his beloved Ebel was nearby. It's all because this guy was a representative of the Black Dragons and rebelled against the king. He was one of those who hated people so much that he was ready to destroy every single one of them. So it was hard for Alucard to pretend that he was interacting nicely with his ally. However, the dragon easily accomplished the task, since a social revolution was at stake. Kelly had no idea that this young man was actually just using her for his own purposes. It was on Het's tip that the lady spread dragon ore everywhere to harm Ebel. However, the woman's efforts were in vain, because the girl had already dealt with this problem. The worst thing for Benyu was that the prince personally helped her search for dragon ore. And now Kelly needed the help of an ally, because she couldn't come up with any plan. She relied entirely on the stranger, as he always offered cunning solutions. Het's level of cunning was a perfect match for Kelly, who was quick to spread rumors. As soon as the guy hinted that Madame should turn to the people, she kissed him. The dragon did not expect the woman to resort to such gratitude for all his useful advice. And Kelly herself was already full of desire to once again spread unpleasant gossip about Ebel. Due to Benyu's proactive actions, Het almost showed her all his hatred for humans. But the guy ran away in time, just to avoid giving himself away prematurely. At that moment, the woman confusedly attributed everything to the fact that Het had never received kisses from women before. But in reality, the hatred inside Alucard was fighting with the pleasant feelings of closeness. And at this time, Lesha honestly admitted to Ebel that all dragons hated people. No matter how unhappy Amond was about this, Sorbian had no intention of hiding the truth from the girl. It seemed strange to the lady that the dragons hated her a priori, even though they had never seen her before. But the heroine was saved by the handsome face of Dragon, who promised to sort out all the problems. Miss had no reason not to trust the guy, who always easily helped her out in difficult moments. Her love for Amond made her turn a blind eye to the fact that the guy was actually a dragon. In the end, the heroine never had any prejudices, so she treated everyone well. And now, the lady has set herself a new goal, wanting to gain Lesha's trust. The girl just happened to have some sweets with her, which she treated the dragoness to. As much as Sorbian wanted to refuse, the king's gaze did not give her such an opportunity. Initially, Lesha treated food prepared by humans with disdain, but the girl's opinion instantly changed as soon as she tried just a piece of the dessert. Sorbian couldn't believe that such a delicious dessert was made by a person. Ebel and Aemond smiled happily when they realized that Lesha liked this sweet. Unconsciously, the dragoness broke into a contented smile from the taste of the sweetness. In fact, she really loved sweets, but she didn't want to admit it to anyone. Since the king had business to attend to, he had to say goodbye to his beloved for a while. He trusted the red dragon completely, so he asked him to take the lady to the store. As much as Lesha didn't want to go with the master, he gave her a very important task. Besides, Aemond would have dealt with the affairs of the castle as a whole without an assistant anyway. That's how the heroine's date ended abruptly, but she wasn't too worried about it. It turned out that Sorbian was able to quickly find a common language with any representative of the human race. Although the lady was worried about the decline in sales, she still had a chance to somehow redeem herself. While the dragoness was ravaging the heroine's shop, she was thinking only about how to improve her business. But Ebel had no idea that more troubles would await her in the palace. It turned out that the emperor decided to reduce the supply of sweets because his wife was pressuring him. The ruler was very susceptible to gossip, which was constantly spread by aristocrats. This led her to believe that the ingredients for the desserts were of poor quality. The empress did not want to get involved in an enterprise that could harm her health. So, despite the previously signed contract, the lady still remained without sales at the palace. This woman had always been stubborn, so it was useless to argue with her any further. But the heroine still began to defend the quality of the products for which she was responsible. After all, not only desserts throughout the empire were prepared from milk, but there were no questions about other food. After listening carefully to the girl, the emperor agreed with her logical arguments. However, this led to the empress demanding a break in relations with Ebel. The lady was finally convinced that no one could argue with this woman, but she personally was pleased by the fact that she no longer had to learn complex palace etiquette. The emperor clearly did not expect that Ebel would not resist because of this decision. The girl could hardly restrain herself from honestly admitting how tired she was of pretending. But the woman was quite satisfied with this result, since she initially did not approve of Travis. And so the lady, with her head held high, left the palace, which had become tiresome to her during this time. Only later, thanks to the letter, did the rulers learn that Ebel had simply slandered the house of Benyu. Only the emperor was ashamed of this, but his wife did not allow anything to be changed about what happened. It was always unpleasant for a woman to admit that she might be wrong about something. Meanwhile, Kelly continued to collaborate with Het, who was offering her terrible ideas. The Black Dragon tried to blame his master for everything, since he no longer trusted him. And Alucard began by damaging Ebel's reputation and accusing her of having caused her own troubles. Even the assistants knew about these rumors, but they tried not to show it. But in the end, all of Travis's delicious desserts were thrown away due to the emperor's wrath. The ruler no longer doubted that the false rumors about the girl were in fact true, but the heroine didn't expect that, as a result, the ban on baking would be reintroduced in the empire. This news was brought to her by Bane, who did not want the girl to find out about it from outsiders. The assistants sided with the young lady, but even this could not console her now. What shocked Reki most was that Holt accused him of not wanting to help Travis. As soon as the prince left in disgrace, Lesha immediately crawled out from behind the counter for more desserts. The dragoness didn't see any problem with banning desserts, since they could be sold abroad. The heroine was amazed by such a simple idea, because for some reason she had not considered this option before. But in another world, the normal situation was the distribution of franchises across different countries. Therefore, nothing stopped the girl from trying to expand her store abroad. The assistants immediately supported the lady's decision, as they were willing to take on any adventure. But almost immediately, the lady realized the reason why she would never be able to do anything like that. The whole point was that even for the export of evil, permission from the emperor was required. Travis had no more ideas on how to save his sweet business, so now the lady will have to close her favorite store because she didn't know what to do. Ebel had no desire to end up in jail for breaking the rules by cooking, and even if the lady continues to bake sweets, most likely they will all just go to waste. Only Lesha did not give in to panic, because she had one very simple plan. At first, the heroine did not even realize her salvation when she heard that the dragons had their own laws. But she quickly realized that this meant there was no ban on baked goods and desserts, So the solution for the candy store came from where no one expected it. In fact, Lesha didn't want to admit that these desserts had already won her heart. The heroine didn't even ask for compliments, because it was enough for her to sell her sweets. But in the end, Sorbian came to agree to collaborate for the sake of greater enjoyment in the future. She even made a huge advance payment, as she expected to shop there for a long time. Belle had no idea there was a dragon in front of her, so she was horrified by the tale. But the girl was tactful enough not to bring up this nuance right now. In the end, it was the heroine who had to explain why their guest was different from ordinary people. Only now did the girl tell her assistants the whole truth about their neighbor with the store. She could only hope that Belle and Holt could not hate Amond. Judging by the maid's reaction, the lady realized too late that she had told her about everything in vain. Even the usually reserved Holt couldn't come to his senses after such an unusual story. But the heroine couldn't rewind time, so she decided to let her assistants calm down for now. To speed up this process, she brewed some delicious tea, which got on her nerves. Thanks to its effect, after just a couple of minutes, the assistants regained a fresh complexion. As a result, the three of them had a fun party, celebrating the fact that not all was lost. From now on, they decided to fight the ban on desserts from the great ruling family of the emperor. And Lesha helped them with this, advertising the girls' delicious desserts with her whole appearance. Aemon carefully monitored the girl's words, not allowing her to say anything bad. Every dragon was surprised at how delicious the human girl's food was, so it became obvious to the dragons that Dragon had feelings for Ebel. Most of all, the king feared condemnation from his assistants, who might turn their backs on him. But it turned out that the support of the ruler was many times more important for every loyal subject. So nothing changed among the dragons, although they were shocked by such news. The only thing is, no one has found Alucard yet, because his trail quickly ended in the forest. Ponter thought that the dragon had disappeared forever, but the master showed him the dragon ore. It immediately became clear to the Duke that Het, who was perfectly fine, was behind this. Aemond could not understand how the black dragon had managed to suppress his hatred all this time. Alucard really could hardly contain himself, as he hated all representatives of humanity. Gradually, he began to sympathize only with Kelly, whose thoughts often coincided with his. And now the odd couple went to Ebel's store to gloat over her. Benyu had no doubt that Travis should have closed long ago due to lack of customers. The woman planned to stroke her ego with this, since the girl had humiliated her too many times. But in reality, things were going well for the heroine, so she was not at all discouraged. So Kelly didn't get to see the long-awaited tears on her damned rival's face. Instead, Benyu had to watch as Ebel continued to laugh merrily at the door of the store. It wasn't for nothing that the woman considered Travis a real piece of trash that didn't deserve to live. She couldn't forgive the girl for choosing desserts instead of her handsome brother. That's why Kelly was so eager to see the nasty lady's store go bankrupt soon. But all this did not lead to the smile disappearing forever from the face of stupid Ebel. Therefore, only Benyu was left out of work, although she had expected to have a good laugh at the girl. Even Het noticed that Kenny was too focused on the other person. However, he too was curious as to why Travis wasn't at all downhearted about the situation with the store. Looking at the happy girl, the couple got the impression that she didn't love her job. But the very next day, the heroine found it difficult to force even a small smile. This is all because customers left sweets in garbage bags near the door of her store. The crumpled food was a huge blow to the girl who had worked so hard to cook. The lady could hardly restrain herself from bursting into tears right in front of the doors of her favorite store. No matter how much her assistant supported Ebel, she was in no mood for fun right now. So part of what Kelly achieved was to upset her young rival. The fact that Travis looked knocked down made Benyu feel a whole lot better. According to their calculations, the girl should now not have enough nerve to bake more sweets. Hetu even felt a little sad that he couldn't see Ebel's tears up close. Everything was going so well that Kelly didn't understand why the guy suddenly hid somewhere below. Personally, she intended to enjoy her opponent's shameful moment until the very end. The whole point was that Aemond himself appeared in front of the store with a huge bouquet of flowers. Benyu had never seen anyone before who could compare in beauty to this aristocrat. While Kelly was once again envious of Ebel, Het tried not to show himself to the stern gentleman. At this moment, the heroine allowed herself to cry, as she was left completely alone. But as soon as the lady heard the doorbell ring, she quickly hid her tears. She didn't expect at all that such a pleasant surprise would await her in the form of her beloved with a bouquet of flowers. The The guy was beaming again, as if nothing better could ever happen in his life. Now he could only rejoice when his beloved beamed with joy at the sight of him. Although not immediately, the heroine noticed that there was some small gift attached to the bouquet. For a moment, the lady thought of a marriage proposal to which she would not agree. But everything turned out much better, because Amond gave the girl only beautiful jewelry. Earrings were always considered a symbol of true love between a couple in the Empire. That's why Travis was even more delighted with such a modest gift than she would have been with a possible ring. As soon as Ebel tried on the jewelry, she became even more delighted with its beauty. During her entire relationship with Amond, the lady never once regretted that they were dating. Each time, the guy somehow miraculously managed to subtly sense the desires of his beloved. Therefore, Miss had nothing to complain about, no matter how much the dragon embarrassed her for the sake of a joke. Their happiness would have lasted forever, if only dragons and people lived the same way. At this time, the entire imperial family studied the latest technologies with great pleasure. None of them regretted any more that the ban on sweets had recently been issued in the Empire. Only one prince was concerned about this situation, so he interrupted his parents' walk. Until the very end, the boy could not believe that his father and mother had treated Ebel so cruelly. The heir hoped that with his logical reasoning, he could easily convince his parents. But this time, the emperor was not in the mood to listen to his son, as he believed the false gossip about Travis. Instead, the ruler preferred to continue to have fun while he had the opportunity. He was delighted with how far its inventors had come in recent times. As soon as they started using dragon ore, all the inventions quickly got off the ground. Only the faithful horses could not appreciate how wonderful the new carriage was for people. Progress really did not stand still. So soon all people were in for a powerful leap in development. The rulers fully supported new technologies, as they sought to make their lives easier. And only Bane was suspicious of the new products, since he understood that you have to pay for everything. However, at this moment, it was Duke Gerard who took a key place in the lives of the emperors. Therefore, the prince quickly realized that no one would take any of his objections seriously enough now. But the guy was just trying to protect his beloved. Although he was completely unsuccessful, even the little princesses were on Ebel's side, as they quickly developed a love for all things sweet. And now, the poor maids were forced to listen to the cries of young girls all day long. The assistants tried to show miracles of resourcefulness, but none of it helped them. Lily and Tilly were only serious about desserts, which were no longer available in the Empire. Even among the aristocrats, there were those who openly grieved over the ban on sweets. Many sincerely did not understand what could have influenced such a cruel order from the ruler. It got to the point where most customers started sending secret emails with dessert orders. Belle was pleased with this popularity, although it did not solve all the problems for the candy store. But all the assistants understood perfectly well that they still could not break the law. So the aristocrats tried their best to buy up the last sweets that were still on sale. But the hardest thing for the heroine was that she was now making deliveries for all the dragons. Lesha's advertising campaign turned out to be so successful that there was no end to the orders. Previously, the lady had no idea that many dragons loved sweets so much. Moreover, they turned out to be such unusually rich clients that she no longer needed money. That's why Ebel thought about hiring more helpers, because they didn't have time to cook. But the question still remained as to which people would agree to work for the dragons. At that very moment, for the first time in a long time, the girl heard a short knock on the door. She could not even imagine what kind of person came to her, despite the emperor's prohibition. As soon as the lady saw the guest, her face instantly lit up with genuine joy. All because Kadisha, who had not been heard from for a long time, decided to visit the store. The woman herself missed the desserts that Ebel secretly continued to prepare. It didn't escape Irene's notice that Travis was sending someone a huge amount of sweets. The heroine didn't have time to come up with arguments, so all her excuses seemed ridiculous and stupid. No one expected that Kadisha would actually be on the side of the candy store representatives. The aristocrat came precisely to support people who were going through hard times. Irene had long wanted to open a business abroad, and now she has found a suitable partner for herself. Who would have thought that the heroine would accidentally find such a good ally for herself? But now Kadisha was planning to open a candy store in several places abroad at once, and this meant that the Ebel store became a full-fledged franchise for all people. It was only late in the evening that the lady shared the latest news with her beloved. Amond immediately supported the girl, because he saw how happy she was about the development of the business. and Dragon personally didn't see a problem with Travis moving into his kitchen as well. But the heroine herself could not allow herself to so brazenly invade someone else's property for the sake of cooking. They had been communicating through the mirror lately, so the king personally missed the sweet lady very much. Therefore, he had even more reason to insist on his help to Ebel. Previously, the heroine had never even thought about taking advantage of her status as a loved one. Despite the fact that the girl had obvious problems with her business, she kept silent about all the troubles. But the lady could not even imagine that her attitude hurt the Dragon King so much. Ebel was raised in such a way that she was not used to relying on people in everything, no matter how close they were. In the end, Aemond was so tired of the girl's indecision and modesty that he decided everything for her. So the lady had to quickly get ready to move the cooking to the castle. The very next morning, the heroine obediently prepared for the move. Although she was excited, whenever the conversation turned to Dragon's tricks, the lady could never refuse him. But the girl's pretty face caught the attention of the guy, whom she later fell deeply in love with. She was used to Aemond keeping all his promises, so she wasn't worried about Derek's arrival. And soon the Raven appeared to personally transport the girl to the Dragon Castle. However, due to the huge amount of work, Ebel completely forgot about this assistant's feature. But he appeared before her many times, not at all embarrassed by his true appearance. In essence, Derek remained himself in any form, and was still just as devoted to his master. At that moment, a noisy fight was taking place among the dragons in the castle over one of the delicious sweets. Lesha was definitely in the lead in this battle, as she was much stronger than everyone else. But as soon as Sorbian saw the king's beloved, she quickly changed her priorities. The dragon's first reaction to the human in the castle was rather dismissive and unpleasant. But Lesha quickly distracted all the dissatisfied people by throwing the last dessert somewhere into the crowd. But the dragoness never got a chance to communicate with her friend, because Aemond picked her up in his arms. Dragon missed his beloved so much that he brazenly stole her from his assistants, despite their objections. In fact, Ebel herself was not against being alone with a guy she had not seen for a long time. They only briefly discussed Het, who had never been found after his recent escape. And immediately after this, the heroine moved on to the question of the kitchen, which she was so eager to see. It turned out that this room was much better than the girl could have imagined. Travis was already dreaming about how great it would be to set up a dessert production facility here. The lady was so carried away that she didn't notice the guy's attentive gaze on her the whole time. Aemond had selected the most capable assistants in advance in order to properly train them in cooking. The guy also found a set of kitchen keys, which he proudly presented to his girlfriend. The lady couldn't even imagine that Dragon would trust her so much in any matters. Aemond then allowed Miss to use whatever ingredients she needed. Ebel never imagined so many good opportunities for herself, even in her wildest dreams. As a token of gratitude, she joyfully threw herself into the arms of the guy who was the best for her. Now, Travis could never imagine her life without this dragon inside her. Their feelings were completely mutual, so happiness completely overwhelmed the two lovers. Pretty soon, the heroine's business began to expand at an incredible rate due to the help. If before such a scale was just a lady's dream, now everything was becoming a reality. Kadisha supported her ally in everything, whose plans were completely in line with her wishes. Of course, both aristocrats kept their union a secret, because the emperor could punish them. But until then, the contract between Travis and Irene was practically unbreakable because of their friendship. In this matter, the girl was also helped by the help of the dragons, who were madly in love with sweets. So the strict ban on delicacies did not become an obstacle to Ebel's dessert preparation, while many aristocrats almost cried, remembering the sweets from Travis. They had a hard time getting used to the new menu, which the emperor and his wife quickly approved of. Particularly impressionable people even composed compliments, including lines about desserts. Even the ban on sweets didn't stop them, because desires were stronger than all the rules. No matter how hard people tried to restrain themselves, they were not very successful after the sweet life. Therefore, tears flowed more and more often on the streets of the empire, because the ruler banned sweets. But the more the aristocrats and commoners became outraged, the stricter the ban became. And only the heroine was not affected by these restrictions, because she had long ago found workarounds. The dragons turned out to be unusually diligent pastry chefs, so business went uphill. In addition, Aemon continued to support his beloved in everything, so problems were resolved quickly. The only thing the girl regretted was that her former assistants did not respond to her letters. In Belle's case, everything was clear, as she and her husband were preparing for the imminent birth. But Holt remained loyal to the old store, even though it was no longer of any use. But everything changed the moment Derek finally got answers from his former assistants. All this time, the lady was impatiently waiting to hear what Belle and Holt would tell her about not going with her. It turned out that the boy and girl still fondly remembered working in the old candy store, so it became clear that both assistants were ready to take active action. The heroine has long realized that all her failures in the past have become her successes this time. That is why the lady was not going to give up, so as not to let down her loyal loved ones. But the question remained, what to do with the emperor, who was now not on her side? Until then, Khadijah had been making every effort to develop her business as a lady in other countries, so Ebel focused entirely on keeping up with all the deliveries. Now Derek was temporarily serving the young lady, delivering all her important letters to their addressees. This was very useful, since the girl was